I had exactly three choices: watch my family freeze to death, sell myself to the highest bidder, or marry a stranger who might be a murderer. I chose the stranger. My name is Clara Whitmore, and this is the story of how I traded my freedom for survival and discovered something far more dangerous than poverty could ever be. If you want to know whether I live to regret that decision, stay with me until the end. And please hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The smell hit me first, not the pine smoke from our pathetic fire or the boiled potatoes we'd been eating for 6 straight days. It was the smell of my father dying, that sour metallic stench of lungs that had breathed too much mine dust, flesh that couldn't fight anymore. I pressed my forehead against the freezing window of our cabin, watching storm clouds gather over the Colorado foothills like vultures circling a corpse. 23 years old, and I was already planning funerals I couldn't afford. "Clara," my father's voice rattled from the corner where we'd moved his cot closer to the stove. "Stop staring at nothing. Come sit." I turned from the window, forcing my face into something that wasn't despair. Thomas Whitmore had been a giant once, 6'3" of Irish stubbornness and muscle. Now he looked like something the mountain had chewed up and spit out. His skin had gone the color of old newspapers, stretched too tight over bones that seemed sharper every morning. "I'm fine, Pa." I moved to his side, tucking the threadbare quilt around his shoulders. We'd already burned most of the furniture for heat. The quilt was one of the last things Ma made before the fever took her 3 winters back. "Just thinking." "Thinking about what?" He tried to smile, but it came out more like a grimace. "Your bright future as a Colorado debutante?" "Something like that." He caught my wrist with fingers that felt like bird bones. "How much do we have left?" I didn't want to answer. The leather pouch under my mattress held exactly $14.37. The mortgage payment alone was $50, due in 9 days. Then there was the tab at Morrison's General Store, the doctor's bills from when we still believed doctors could help, the property tax. "Enough," I lied. "Clara Elizabeth Whitmore." He used my full name, which meant he saw right through me. "I raised you better than that." "How much?" $14. The number hung between us like an execution date. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. He closed his eyes. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'm so damn sorry." "Don't." My throat went tight. "Don't you dare apologize for getting sick. You worked yourself half to death keeping us fed after I should have sold this place years ago. Should have moved you somewhere with actual opportunities, not this godforsaken, this is our home. This is a coffin on a hill." He opened his eyes again, and they were wet. "And I'm leaving you here to freeze in it." I couldn't argue because he was right. The cabin my grandfather built 50 years ago was falling apart around us. Half the roof leaked. The door didn't sit square in its frame anymore. Wind came through gaps in the walls like cold fingers searching for warm flesh. And the debt collectors were circling. I'd seen Bernard Shaw in town 3 days ago, watching our cabin from across the muddy excuse for a main street. Shaw worked for the mining company that owned half the territory. He had the kind of face that looked friendly until you noticed his eyes, flat and patient as a snake's. "Miss Whitmore," he'd called out, tipping his hat. "Lovely day." It was sleeting. "Mr. Shaw." I kept walking. "I hate to be indelicate," he'd continued, falling into step beside me, "but I feel obliged to remind you that certain financial obligations are coming due quite soon." "I'm aware." "Of course you are. You're a smart girl." His smile never reached those dead eyes. "Smart enough to know what happens when people can't pay their debts in these parts." I'd stopped walking then and turned to face him directly. "If you're threatening me, Mr. Shaw, have the stones to say it plain." He'd laughed, a dry sound like pages turning in an old book. "Not a threat, Miss Whitmore, just facts. The bank forecloses, the cabin gets sold at auction, and you—" He'd gestured vaguely. "Well, a young woman without means has limited options, though I'm sure you're resourceful." The way he'd said resourceful made my skin crawl. I'd walked away without another word, but his meaning was clear. Women who couldn't pay their debts ended up in Denver brothels or married to whoever would take them, usually men 3 times their age with missing teeth and wandering hands. Now sitting beside my dying father in our freezing cabin, those options felt less like threats and more like inevitabilities. There's something I need to tell you, Pa said quietly. Nothing good ever started with those words. I wrote to your Aunt Margaret in St. Louis, told her about everything. He gestured weakly at himself, at the cabin, at our entire collapsing life. She wrote back last week, said she'd take you in. You could work in her dress shop, learn the trade, eventually meet a decent man, have a proper life. You want me to abandon you. The words came out harder than I meant them. I want you to live. His grip tightened on my wrist. What's waiting for you here? Debt and snow and a grave next to your old man's? You're young, Clara, you're smart and strong, and I deserve to choose my own path. I pulled my hand free, gentler this time. And I'm not running to St. Louis to fold petticoats while you die alone. Stubborn as your mother. You say that like it's a bad thing. He tried to laugh but ended up coughing instead, deep, wet sounds that shook his whole frame. I grabbed the water cup and helped him drink, trying not to see the flecks of blood on his lips afterward. When he finally caught his breath, he looked at me with something like pride. You know what I see when I look at you? A daughter who's too stubborn for her own good? A survivor. He touched my cheek with trembling fingers. You're going to make it, Clara. One way or another. You're too damn tough to do anything else. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe I could somehow thread the needle between poverty and prostitution, that some magical third option would present itself before the bank took everything. But wanting and having are two different things. Ike. The knock came 3 nights later, right as darkness swallowed the foothills whole. I was adding the last of our potatoes to the pot when knuckles rapped against wood, firm, unhurried, the knock of someone who expected to be answered. Pa tensed on his cot. Who visits at this hour? Nobody good. I grabbed the fireplace poker, its weight familiar in my hands. We didn't get visitors, not anymore. The neighbors had stopped pretending to care once it became clear we had nothing left to borrow or steal. The knock came again. Patient. I moved to the door, keeping the poker ready. Who is it? Someone with a business proposition. The voice was male, deep, with the kind of Western drawl that came from men who spent more time talking to horses than people. Name's Elias Mercer. I'm looking for Clara Whitmore. My stomach dropped. Debt collectors didn't usually introduce themselves, but maybe the mining company had changed tactics. What kind of proposition? I called through the door. The kind best discussed face-to-face, ma'am. I promise I'm not here to cause trouble. Then state your business from there. A pause. Then, I'm here to offer you a way out of your current difficulties. But I suspect you won't want your neighbors hearing the details. What neighbors? The Johnsons had moved to Denver last month. The Kowalskis, 2 cabins down, were barely scraping by themselves. But his point stood. In towns this small, walls had ears and gossip traveled faster than telegraph wires. I looked back at Pa. He'd managed to sit up, watching me with feverish intensity. Let him in, he said quietly. Pa, if he wanted to rob us, he'd have kicked the door down. Let him in. Against every instinct screaming in my head, I unlatched the door. The man who stepped inside had to duck under the frame. He was tall, taller even than Pa had been in his prime, with shoulders broad enough to fill a doorway and hands scarred from real work. His face was hard to read, angular and weathered like something carved from the mountains themselves. Dark hair fell past his collar, and several days' worth of beard shadowed his jaw. But it was his eyes that caught me, gray as storm clouds, and just as unreadable. He took in the cabin in one sweep, the leaking roof, the burned furniture, the dying man on the cot, and something that might have been sympathy crossed his face. Miss Whitmore. He nodded to me, then to Pa. Mr. Whitmore. You've got 5 minutes, I said, still holding the poker. Talk. Elias Mercer smiled slightly like he appreciated my directness. Fair enough. I'll be blunt. I know you owe the mining company $53 by the end of the week. I know the general store's holding another $30 in credit. I know the county's about to seize this property for back taxes. Congratulations. You can add. I kept my voice flat. What's your point? My point is that I can make all of that disappear. He reached into his coat. I raised the poker and slowly pulled out a leather billfold. Every debt paid in full, plus enough extra to keep you and your father comfortable through winter. The poker wavered slightly. In exchange for what? He met my eyes directly. Marriage. The word hit like a physical blow. Pa made a sound somewhere between outrage and disbelief. Now see here, Let me finish, Elias said calmly, holding up one hand. I'm not asking Miss Whitmore to be my property or my servant. I'm offering a practical arrangement between two adults who need something from each other. What could you possibly need from me? I demanded. A wife. He said it like he was discussing the weather. Someone willing to live in rough country, work hard, and not ask too many questions. In return, I pay your debts, take care of your father's medical needs, and guarantee your family won't starve. That's insane. But my mind was already calculating 53 plus 30 plus the back taxes. He was offering to solve problems I couldn't fix in 5 lifetimes of work. It's practical, he corrected. You need money. I need a wife. Simple mathematics. Nothing about this is simple. I lowered the poker slightly. Why? Why would you pay that kind of money for this? I gestured at myself, too thin, too rough, dressed in clothes I'd mended until they were more patched than original fabric. Because I value honesty over appearances. His gaze didn't waver. And because the women in my part of the territory only see dollar signs when they look at a man. I'm tired of being courted for my prospects instead of my character. You must be rich as Midas if that's your problem. Comfortable enough to help you. Isolated enough to need help myself. Pa struggled to sit up straighter. This is madness. Clara, you can't seriously be considering... I'm considering survival, I cut him off, which is more than I had 5 minutes ago. Elias pulled a thick envelope from his coat. The money's here, $500 total, enough to clear every debt and keep your father in medicine and care for the foreseeable future. All I ask is that you come with me to my property, stand beside me for a legal marriage ceremony, and give the arrangement a genuine try. Where's your property? High country, 3 days' ride into the mountains. Isolated, I said. Private, he corrected. Same thing. Not quite. He set the envelope on our rickety table. The difference is choice. Isolation traps you. Privacy protects you. I stared at the envelope like it might bite me. $500. I'd never seen that much money in one place. It was salvation and trap all at once. The answer to every prayer I'd stopped bothering to say. How do I know you're not some kind of... I struggled for the word. Murderer? Slaver? Madman? He didn't seem offended. You don't. Just like I don't know if you're a thief or a liar or someone who'll poison my coffee first chance she gets. That's why I'm calling it an arrangement, not a fairy tale. We'd be taking a risk on each other. That's supposed to be reassuring? It's supposed to be honest. He nodded toward Pa. Your father's dying. You know it. I know it. In a month, maybe 2, you'll be alone in this cabin with creditors breaking down your door. I'm offering you another option. An option where I marry a complete stranger and disappear into the mountains. I laughed, but it came out bitter. Forgive me if I'm not jumping at the opportunity. I'm not asking you to jump. I'm asking you to think. Elias moved toward the door. I'll be at the hotel in town for 3 more days. If you decide you'd rather take your chances here, that's your choice. But if you want out, he tapped the envelope. That's the price of admission. He opened the door, and cold air rushed in like water through a breach. Why me? I asked suddenly. There are dozens of women in this territory, prettier ones whose fathers aren't dying in a cabin that's falling apart. Why come here? Elias looked back, and for the first time, something almost human crossed his face. Because I asked around about you, Clara Whitmore. Asked about the girl who runs the Morrison store account, who negotiates with bill collectors, who keeps a dying man comfortable and a failing cabin standing through sheer stubbornness. He smiled slightly. That's not just survival, that's strength. And strength is worth more than a pretty face. Then he was gone, swallowed by darkness and snow. I stood there with the poker in my hand and $500 on the table, listening to my father's labored breathing and the wind screaming through gaps in the walls. Clara, Pa's voice was barely a whisper. You can't. Can't what? Accept help? Choose a hard life over a hopeless one? You don't know this man. He could be exactly what he says. I set down the poker and picked up the envelope. It was heavy, real. Or he could be worse than poverty. But at least it's a choice, Pa. At least it's something other than watching you die while I count down the days until the bank takes everything. I won't let you sell yourself. You don't get a vote. The words came out harsher than I meant, but I didn't take them back. You're dying, and we both know it. So either I do this or I end up in Denver doing things a hell of a lot worse than marrying a stranger. At least this way I get to pretend I chose it. I opened the envelope. Bills, crisp and new, more money than I'd seen in my entire life. Pa was crying now, silent tears tracking down his wasted face. Your mother would never forgive me. Ma's dead. I counted the bills mechanically. All there. 500 exactly. And we're alive for now. I'd like to keep it that way. For 3 days, I carried that envelope like it was made of lead. I walked through town, feeling the weight of it against my ribs, watching Bernard Shaw watch me from across the street. I bargained with Dr. Hendricks, who agreed to keep checking on Pa in exchange for actual payment instead of promises. I stood in front of Morrison's general store and imagined walking in to clear our debt. Imagined the look on Harold Morrison's face when I paid in cash instead of excuses. But mostly, I thought about Elias Mercer, a man I'd spoken to for maybe 15 minutes, a man offering salvation at a price I couldn't calculate. Marriage to a stranger meant giving up control of everything, my body, my choices, my entire future. The law was crystal clear. Wives were property. What's his became mine only in name. What's mine became his, in fact. And yet, I kept coming back to his eyes, to the way he looked at our cabin, not with pity or disgust, but with something closer to understanding, like he knew what it meant to be trapped by circumstances beyond your control. On the third night, Pa's breathing got worse. I sat beside his cot, listening to the wet rattle in his lungs, counting the seconds between breaths. Dr. Hendricks had been by that morning and pulled me aside afterward. Days, he'd said quietly. Maybe a week, if he's stubborn. He's Irish, I'd replied. Stubborn is built into the bones. But stubbornness only gets you so far. Around midnight, Pa woke up. Clara? I'm here. The money. Did you spend it? Not yet. Why not? I didn't have a good answer. Waiting for the right moment, I guess. The right moment is now. He gripped my hand with surprising strength. Clear the debts. Get yourself to St. Louis. Live, Clara, please. What if I don't want St. Louis? Then what do you want? I thought about the cabin, cold and broken, but ours. I thought about the mountains rising black against the stars. I thought about Elias Mercer, standing in our doorway like some kind of practical angel, offering salvation without promises. I want to not feel trapped anymore, I said finally. I want to make a choice that's mine, even if it's the wrong one. I trailed off because I didn't know how to finish that sentence. Pa pulled me closer, his breath hot and wrong against my ear. Then make your choice. Just promise me one thing. What? Promise me you'll survive. Whatever happens next, you survive it. You hear me? I hear you. Say it. I promise I'll survive. He died 3 hours later, so quietly I almost missed it. One breath, then nothing. Just empty silence where a man used to be. I sat there until dawn, holding his hand as it went cold, trying to figure out how to grieve when there wasn't time. I buried Pa on a freezing morning with Dr. Hendricks and Harold Morrison as the only witnesses. The ground was half frozen, and it took me 4 hours to dig the hole deep enough. By the time I finished, my hands were bleeding through my gloves, but I barely felt it. Pain seemed distant, unimportant. Morrison offered empty condolences. Hendricks pressed a flask of whiskey into my hand. For after, he said. After the burial. After the grief. After I figured out what the hell to do next. I drank it standing by the grave, feeling the burn all the way down. Then I walked to the hotel. Elias answered on the second knock, looking like he hadn't slept in days. Miss Whitmore. He died this morning, I said. No point in easing into it. Something shifted in his expression. I'm sorry. Are you? I pulled the envelope from my coat. Because I need to know right now if this offer was real, or if you're the kind of man who makes promises to desperate people and disappears when it's convenient. It was real. He stepped back, gesturing me inside. Is real. The hotel room was sparse: a bed, a chair, a window overlooking the muddy street. Elias moved to a small desk and pulled out papers. "This is a contract," he said, spreading them out. "Plain English, no legal tricks. I pay your debts as promised. You come with me as my wife. If at any point you want out, you take whatever's yours and go. No questions, no pursuit." I scanned the papers. He wasn't lying. The language was straightforward, almost aggressively clear. "You just let me leave?" "I'm not looking for a prisoner. I'm looking for a partner." "In what?" "Life, work, building something that lasts." He met my eyes. "I live hard, Miss Whitmore. The mountains don't forgive mistakes, and the work's brutal. But it's honest work, clean work, and I don't share it with people who'd rather be somewhere else." I looked at the contract, at this stranger offering me a future I couldn't even imagine. "I need one thing first," I said. "Name it. A headstone for my father, something good, with his name carved proper." "Done. And I want to see him buried before we leave." "Of course." I picked up the pen he'd set beside the contract. "Then I guess we have a deal." "You sure about this?" For the first time, Elias looked uncertain. "Once you sign, there's no taking it back." "I was trapped either way," I said. "At least this trap has doors." I signed my name, Clara Elizabeth Whitmore, in careful letters at the bottom of the page. Elias signed beside it, and just like that, my old life ended. Keys. The headstone came 3 days later. Good granite, with Pa's name, dates, and a line I'd chosen. He worked until he couldn't. Morrison saw it when he came to collect on the store debt and found a pile of cash instead. His eyes went wide. "Where'd you get this kind of money?" "Does it matter?" I counted it out carefully. $30. We're square. He stared at me like I'd grown a second head. "Clara, what did you do?" "I made a choice." I turned toward the cabin. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have packing to do." I didn't own much. Clothes, a few books, my mother's quilt. Everything fit in one trunk and a canvas bag. The cabin itself would go to the bank, let them try to sell a pile of kindling in the middle of nowhere. Bernard Shaw showed up on my last night there. "I hear you've come into some money," he said, standing in the doorway like an unwelcome ghost. "I've settled my accounts." "That's all that concerns you." "And where'd this money come from?" "None of your damn business." His smile was cold. "Everything in this territory is my business, Miss Whitmore. The mining company doesn't like loose ends. We don't like people suddenly paying off debts they couldn't afford yesterday. Makes us curious. Curiosity's not a crime. No, but fraud is. Theft is." He stepped closer. "So I'll ask you one more time. Where'd the money come from?" "My husband." That stopped him. "Your what?" "Husband. Elias Mercer. We were married 3 days ago." I showed him the marriage certificate Elias had filed at the county office. He paid my debts as a wedding gift, all legal, all proper. "Is there a problem?" Shaw's face went through several complicated expressions. "You got married. People do that." "To who?" "I've never heard of an Elias Mercer. He's from high country, keeps to himself." I smiled sweetly. "Not everyone feels the need to announce their business to mining company thugs." His jaw tightened. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is." I pulled the door shut between us. "My debts are paid. My property is forfeit to the bank as legally required. You have no claim on me or mine. Now get off my porch before I scream loud enough to wake the whole town." He left, but not before giving me a look that promised consequences. I didn't sleep that night, just sat by the dying fire, watching shadows dance on walls I'd never see again. At dawn, Elias arrived with a wagon. "Ready?" he asked. I looked at the cabin one last time, at Pa's empty cot, at the corner where Ma used to sit mending, at 23 years of life I was leaving behind. "No," I said honestly. "But I'm going anyway." I climbed into the wagon. Elias flicked the reins, and just like that, Clara Whitmore rode away from everything she'd ever known, toward a future she couldn't see, beside a man she didn't trust. The mountains swallowed us whole before the sun cleared the horizon. The first day we barely spoke. Elias drove the wagon with the kind of focus that didn't leave room for conversation. Clara sat beside him, wrapped in her mother's quilt, watching the foothills shrink behind them as the real mountains rose ahead like teeth. The silence wasn't comfortable. It was the silence of two strangers who'd legally bound themselves together without knowing if the other snored or had a temper or woke up mean. Clara kept stealing glances at her new husband, if that's what he was, trying to read something in the set of his shoulders or the line of his jaw. He caught her looking once and raised an eyebrow. "Something on your mind?" "Just wondering if I made a huge mistake." "Fair question." He didn't seem offended. "You get an answer yet?" "Still working on it." The wagon hit a rut, jolting them both. Clara grabbed the seat to keep from sliding into him. Elias steadied the horses with a low word she didn't catch. "How long's this trip?" she asked. 3 days, maybe 4 if the weather turns." "And where exactly are we going?" "I told you, high country." "That's not an answer." He smiled slightly. "It's the only answer you're getting until we're there." Clara pulled the quilt tighter. "You know, most men at least pretend to be charming when they're trying to convince a woman she didn't just ruin her life." "I'm not most men, and I'm not trying to convince you of anything." Elias glanced at her. "You made your choice. I made mine. Now we see where it goes." "That's supposed to be reassuring?" "It's supposed to be honest." There was that word again. Honest. Like honesty was currency in whatever world Elias lived in. Clara wasn't sure she believed him, but she also wasn't sure she had a choice. The wagon kept moving, and every mile put the past further behind them. By midday, they'd left anything resembling civilization. The road, if you could call it that, became a narrow track winding between pines so tall they blocked out half the sky. Snow clung to branches overhead, occasionally dropping in wet clumps that made the horses snort and shake their heads. "There's food in the pack behind you," Elias said. "Help yourself." Clara dug through this canvas pack and found bread, dried meat, and apples that had seen better days. She bit into the bread, surprised to find it fresh. "You bake this?" "Town baker. I'm not completely useless in civilization." "Could have fooled me." He actually laughed at that, a short bark of sound that seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. "You've got a mouth on you, Clara Whitmore." "Clara Mercer now," she corrected, then immediately wished she hadn't. The name felt foreign on her tongue, like wearing someone else's coat. Elias went quiet for a moment. "You can keep Whitmore if you want. I'm not trying to erase who you were. Just transport me to the middle of nowhere and marry me." "You signed the paper." "I did." She took another bite of bread, chewing slowly. "Doesn't mean I'm not allowed to have complicated feelings about it." "Never said you weren't." They lapsed back into silence, but it felt slightly less hostile than before. Clara watched the landscape change as they climbed higher, the pines giving way to aspens with white bark like bone, the air getting thinner and colder with each mile. Her hands were still raw from digging Pa's grave. She'd wrapped them in strips of cloth, but the cold made them ache anyway. She flexed her fingers trying to keep blood moving. "You hurt?" Elias asked without looking at her. "I'm fine." "That's not what I asked." Clara sighed. "My hands are sore. It's nothing." "From the grave." It wasn't a question. She glanced at him sharply. "You were watching?" "I was in town. Hard not to notice a woman digging a hole in frozen ground for 4 hours. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small tin. "Here." "What is it?" "Salve, for your hands." She took it, suspicious. The tin was worn smooth from use, and when she opened it, the smell of pine pitch and something else, herbs maybe, hit her nose. "You make this?" "Friend of mine does. Works better than anything you'll find in a store." Clara dabbed some on her palms, and the sting eased almost immediately. "Thanks." "Don't mention it." But she'd noticed something else, too. The way he'd said friend, carefully, like he wasn't used to having them. And the fact that he'd been in town, watching her bury her father, but hadn't approached. Had stayed back, giving her space. Maybe Elias Mercer was exactly what he'd claimed to be. Or maybe he was just good at playing parts. Either way, Clara was stuck with him now. They made camp that night in a clearing surrounded by pines. Elias unhitched the horses with the easy movements of someone who'd done it 1,000 times, while Clara gathered what dry wood she could find under the snow. "You know how to start a fire?" he asked. "I'm not completely helpless." "Didn't say you were." "Just asking." She did know, but her cold fingers fumbled with the flint, and it took 3 tries to get sparks. When the kindling finally caught, she felt a rush of satisfaction entirely out of proportion to the accomplishment. Elias set up a small cooking pot over the flames and added water, dried beans, and some kind of cured meat. Within minutes, the smell made Clara's stomach growl. "When'd you last eat?" he asked. "This morning." "Before that?" She tried to remember. "Yesterday? Maybe." He didn't comment, just ladled out a bowl and handed it to her. The stew was simple but hot, and Clara burned her tongue in her hurry to eat it. "Slow down," Elias said. "There's plenty. Sorry, I'm just—" She trailed off, embarrassed. "Hungry, I know." He filled his own bowl and sat on a log across the fire from her. "You don't have to apologize for needing things, Clara. Not here." Old habit. "I'm noticing." They ate in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Clara watched Elias when she thought he wasn't looking. He moved with a kind of economy that suggested someone used to living alone. No wasted motion, no unnecessary noise, everything deliberate. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. "Can I stop you?" "Probably not, but I'm trying to be polite." He smiled into his bowl. "Go ahead." "Why'd you really come looking for a wife? And don't give me that line about women only seeing dollar signs. There's got to be more to it than that." Elias set down his bowl and leaned back, firelight cutting shadows across his face. "You want the short version or the long one?" "Whichever one's true." "Fair enough." He picked up a stick and poked at the fire. "I tried the normal way, courting, dances, all that. Met a woman in Denver about 2 years back, Sarah Thornton. Beautiful, educated, came from a good family. Everything a man's supposed to want." "What happened?" "She visited my place once, lasted 3 days before she started crying and begging to go back to the city. Said she couldn't possibly live somewhere so isolated, so primitive, so—" He paused. "Uncivilized." "Oh, yeah. Oh." He jabbed the fire harder than necessary. "Thing is, I don't blame her. Not everyone's cut out for mountain living, but it made me realize I needed someone who already knew what hardship looked like. Someone who wouldn't run at the first sign of difficulty." "So you went shopping for a desperate woman." "I went looking for a strong one." He met her eyes across the flames. "There's a difference." Clara wanted to argue, but she couldn't. He was right, in a way. She'd been desperate, yes, but she'd also been strong enough to survive things that would have broken softer people. "What about you?" Elias asked. "You could have taken that money and run to St. Louis like your father wanted. Why didn't you?" "Because I'm tired of other people deciding what's best for me." The words came out sharper than she intended. "My whole life, it's been, Clara, do this. Clara, don't do that. Clara, you can't possibly handle X, Y, or Z. Even Pa, right at the end, was trying to ship me off somewhere safe." "You don't want safe. I want to make my own damn choices. Even if they're wrong. Even if they end badly. At least they're mine." Elias studied her for a long moment. "We might actually understand each other, Clara Whitmore." "Mercer," she corrected again, then shook her head. "Maybe. Or maybe we're both just stubborn enough to drive each other crazy." "That's a distinct possibility." She laughed despite herself. "Well, at least you're honest about it." They talked a little more that night. Small things, careful things. Elias told her about the mountains, about the animals she might see, about weather patterns and how to read them. Clara told him about her father's work in the mines, about how her mother had died, about learning to keep books for Morrison's store when she was barely 16. It wasn't friendship, not yet, but it was something less hostile than the silence they'd started with. When the fire burned low, Elias stood and pulled a bedroll from the wagon. "You take the wagon bed, I'll sleep out here." "You don't have to—" "Yes, I do." His voice was firm. "Contract says you can leave whenever you want. That includes deciding when or if you want to share a bed. Until you say otherwise, I sleep separate." Clara felt something loosen in her chest. She hadn't realized how tense she'd been, waiting to see if he'd demand his so-called marital rights. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Don't thank me for basic decency." She climbed into the wagon, wrapped herself in blankets, and listened to Elias moving around the camp. The sounds of him banking the fire, checking the horses, settling into his own bedroll. Above her, through gaps in the wagon's canvas top, stars burned cold and distant. Clara had never felt so far from home in her life. The second day was harder. They climbed steadily into country so steep the wagon could barely manage. Twice, they had to stop and clear fallen branches from the path. Once, a wheel got stuck in frozen mud, and it took both of them 20 minutes of cursing and pushing to free it. By noon, Clara's whole body ached. She wasn't used to this kind of travel, this kind of cold. Her hands throbbed despite the salve, and her feet had gone numb in boots that weren't quite warm enough. Elias noticed. Of course he did. "We can rest," he offered. "I'm fine." "Clara, I said I'm fine." She heard the snap in her voice and tried to soften it. "I'm not some delicate flower who needs coddling." "Never said you were. But there's a difference between strength and stubbornness," says the man who lives alone in the mountains. He laughed. "Touché." They kept going, but Elias did slow the pace slightly. Clara pretended not to notice. The landscape had changed again. They were above the tree line now, in a world of rock and ice and wind that cut through every layer she wore. The beauty of it was brutal, all sharp edges and impossible distances, like something carved by a knife instead of time. "How much further?" Clara asked through chattering teeth. "We'll make the pass by nightfall. After that it's downhill. Into your mysterious valley. Into home." Yeah, the word hung between them. Home. Clara didn't have one of those anymore. The cabin was gone, Pa was dead, and everything familiar had disappeared behind miles of frozen trail. "What if I hate it?" she asked suddenly. Elias didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was careful. "Then you hate it. And eventually you decide if you can live with that hate, or if you'd rather leave. Just like that. Just like that. You'd really let me go. I told you I would. I don't make promises I can't keep." Clara wanted to believe him, but belief was harder than it looked when you were this cold, this tired, this far from anything that made sense. They reached the pass just as the sun started to drop. Elias stopped the wagon at the top, and Clara understood why. The view nearly stopped her heart. Ahead, the mountains fell away into a valley so vast it seemed impossible. Pine forests stretched for miles, broken by a river that cut silver through the center. And there, maybe 10 miles distant, she could see buildings. Real buildings, not just cabins. Stone and timber structures clustered near the river, smoke rising from chimneys. "That's it?" she asked. "That's it, Winter Hollow." "That's not a cabin." "No." Elias smiled slightly. "It's not." Clara stared at the valley, trying to process what she was seeing. This wasn't the rough mountain homestead she'd imagined. This was something else, something bigger. "You lied to me," she said slowly. "I never lied. I just didn't explain everything." He urged the horses forward, starting the descent. "Figured you'd see for yourself soon enough." "That's not a poor man's property, Elias." "Never claimed to be poor. Just said I was tired of women who only cared about money." Clara's mind raced. The contract, the way he dressed, the carefully vague descriptions of his life, all of it suddenly clicked into a different picture. "Who are you?" she demanded. "Really?" "Same person I've always been, just with more context now." "That's not an answer." "It's the one you're getting until we get down there and I can explain properly." He glanced at her. "You mad?" "I don't know yet. Ask me when I figure out what the hell I've gotten myself into." The descent took another 2 hours. As they got closer, Clara could make out more details. The main building was massive. 3 stories of stone foundation with timber upper floors, windows that caught the dying light. Around it clustered smaller structures, what looked like workers' housing, a mill by the river, barns, storage buildings. People were working down there. She could see figures moving between buildings, smoke rising from multiple chimneys. This wasn't just a home. It was a compound, maybe even a small town. "How many people live here?" she asked. "About 40, give or take. Most of them work the timber operations. Some of them run the mill. Few do general maintenance and supplies. Timber operations. We're a logging company, small by some standards, but profitable enough." Clara's stomach dropped. "You own a logging company." "Technically, I inherited it, but yes." "And you didn't think to mention this before I signed a legal contract binding myself to you?" Elias pulled the wagon to a stop just before they entered the valley proper. "If I'd told you I was rich, Would you have believed I wanted you for anything other than a warm body and cheap labor? I... She stopped because he was right. She would have assumed the worst. I needed you to see me as a man first, he continued, not a bank account. Everything I told you was true. I am tired of being courted for my money. I do live rough by most people's standards, and I did need someone strong enough to handle this life. The money's just context. Context? Clara laughed, but it sounded slightly hysterical. You call owning half a mountain context? I don't own half a mountain. I own a timber operation in a valley that happens to be surrounded by mountains. He turned to face her fully. And before you ask, yes, this changes things in terms of expectations. People down there are going to judge you. They're going to whisper and gossip and decide whether you're worthy of being here. It's going to be uncomfortable as hell. You couldn't have warned me about this before we got here? Would you have come if I had? Clara opened her mouth to say yes, then closed it again. She honestly didn't know. The man she'd agreed to marry was a poor mountain man with a rough life. The man sitting beside her now was apparently some kind of wilderness timber baron with employees and property and expectations. I need a minute, she said. Take all the time you need. She climbed down from the wagon, her legs shaking from cold and exhaustion and the sudden realization that she'd agreed to something far more complicated than she'd understood. The valley stretched before her, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Behind her, she heard Elias moving around the wagon, giving her space. Clara pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to think clearly. She could turn around right now. Take the money from the contract and disappear. Elias had promised she could leave whenever she wanted. But go where? Back to nothing? Forward to St. Louis in a dress shop and a life of safe, predictable mediocrity? Or stay here, in this impossible valley, beside a man who'd lied by omission about everything except the parts that mattered? She thought about her father's last words. Promise me you'll survive. Surviving meant making hard choices. It meant taking risks. It meant stepping forward even when you couldn't see the path. Clara dropped her hands and turned back to the wagon. I want the whole truth now, she said. No more surprises. No more context I have to discover myself. If we're doing this, I need to know exactly what I'm walking into. Elias nodded slowly. Fair enough. My full name is Elias Mercer Blackwood. My father built the timber business 30 years ago. When he died 5 years back, it came to me. The company's worth somewhere around $200,000, depending on the market. We employ 43 people directly and support maybe another 100 indirectly through suppliers and contracts. Clara felt dizzy. $200,000. That was more money than she could properly comprehend. The main house you're seeing is where I live, Elias continued. It's big because my father liked entertaining business partners. I don't, so most of it sits empty. The workers' village is separate, about half a mile downriver. They're good people mostly. Some of them are going to resent you because they think I should have married someone from their families. Some are going to kiss up to you because they think you have influence. Most will just wait to see what kind of person you actually are. What else? I have family. An aunt in Denver who runs the business side of things from there. She's going to hate you on principle because she wanted me married to some society woman who could make connections and bring in investors. There's also cousins, business partners, people with stakes in the company's success. They're all going to have opinions about you. This keeps getting better. You asked for the truth. I did. Clara took a breath. What else do I need to know? The work is real. I wasn't lying about that. This place only runs because everyone pulls their weight. If you're here as my wife, people are going to expect you to actually do something, not just sit around looking pretty. I've never just sat around in my life. I know. That's why I chose you. He stepped down from the wagon and stood beside her. Clara, I know this is more than you signed up for. I know I should have explained everything before we left. But I meant what I said. If you want out, say the word. I'll give you money, arrange transport, make sure you land somewhere safe. No questions, no guilt. She looked at him, really looked. In the fading light, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. He was nervous. This man who owned mountains and employed dozens was actually nervous about what she'd decide. Why me? She asked again. With all this, you could have had anyone. Why track down a dying man's daughter in a falling apart cabin? Because everyone else wanted something from me, he said quietly. My money, my connections, my name. You were the first person in years who looked at me and only saw a problem to solve, not an opportunity, not a prize, just a choice. A desperate choice. Still a choice. You chose yourself over safety. That takes guts. He met her eyes. I need someone with guts, Clara. Not someone who'll smile and nod while the world falls apart. Someone who'll fight back. Fight what? Everything that's coming. Business rivals, family drama, winters that'll try to kill us, markets that shift, equipment that breaks down. He gestured at the valley. Running this place is a war on about 15 different fronts. I can't do it alone anymore. I tried. It's eating me alive. Clara processed this slowly. He wasn't looking for a decorative wife or cheap labor. He was looking for a partner. An actual partner in something bigger than either of them. I don't know anything about running a timber company, she said. You know how to manage accounts. You know how to deal with people who underestimate you. You know how to survive when everything's stacked against you. He smiled slightly. That's more useful than you'd think. You're assuming I'm staying. I'm hoping you'll at least see the place before you decide. Clara looked at the valley again. The river caught the last light, turning gold for a moment before fading to silver. Smoke rose from chimneys in straight lines, suggesting calm air and settled weather. In the distance, she could hear the faint sound of the mill wheel turning. It was beautiful, terrifying, completely insane. One condition, she said. Name it. You don't lie to me again. Not about big things, not about small things. If I'm going to be here, I need to trust you, and I can't trust you if you keep hiding things until it's convenient to reveal them. Deal. He stuck out his hand. No more lies. She shook it, feeling the calluses on his palm that matched her own. Then I guess we should see this place up close. They climbed back into the wagon, and Elias guided the horses down the final slope into Winter Hollow. As they got closer, Clara could see people stopping to watch them approach. Workers paused mid-task, heads turning, conversations dying. They're staring, she muttered. Of course they are. Their boss just showed up with a wife nobody knew existed. This is going to be awful, isn't it? Probably, Elias grinned. But I've got a feeling you can handle it. The wagon rolled into what passed for the main yard, a wide space between buildings where equipment sat waiting and a few horses stood tied to posts. A woman emerged from one of the buildings, wiping her hands on her apron. She was maybe 50, with steel gray hair pulled back tight and eyes that missed nothing. Mr. Blackwood, she called out, you're back. I am, Martha. This is Clara, my wife. If Martha was surprised, she hid it well. She looked Clara up and down with the assessing gaze of someone who'd spent a lifetime managing difficult situations. Your wife, Martha repeated. Well, that's news. It's recent, Elias said. I can see that. Martha's expression softened slightly. You look half frozen, child. Come on, let's get you inside before you catch your death. Clara climbed down from the wagon on legs that barely held her. Martha caught her elbow, steadying her. Easy now. You've had a rough few days, I'd wager. You could say that. Well, you're here now, for better or worse. Martha shot Elias a look. Though I suspect my employer has some explaining to do about springing surprises on unsuspecting women. I'm working on it, Elias said. Work faster. Martha guided Clara toward the main house. Come on, dear. Let's get you fed and warm, and then we'll figure out what on earth we're going to do with you. Clara glanced back at Elias, who was already being swarmed by workers with questions. He caught her eye and nodded slightly, a gesture that might have been reassurance or apology or both. Then Martha pulled her through a door into warmth and light, and Clara's new life began whether she was ready for it or not. The inside of the house made Clara's breath catch for the second time that day. Martha led her through an entrance hall with floors so polished Clara could see her reflection, a thin, exhausted woman with tangled hair and clothes that hadn't been properly cleaned in a week. Paintings lined the walls, landscapes mostly, and the ceilings rose high enough to make her dizzy. Your boots, Martha said, not unkindly. Leave them by the door. Clara looked down at her mud-caked, nearly worn-through boots, sitting next to the entrance of what was probably the finest house she'd ever set foot in. The contrast was almost funny. This way. Martha moved through a doorway into what turned out to be a kitchen bigger than Clara's entire childhood cabin. A massive iron stove dominated one wall, copper pots hanging above it. A work table stretched down the center, scarred from years of use but scrubbed clean. "Sit," Martha commanded, pointing to a chair by the stove. Clara sat. Her body seemed to fold in on itself, every muscle discovering new ways to ache. Martha bustled around the kitchen with practiced efficiency, ladling soup from a pot on the stove, cutting thick slices of bread, pouring coffee that smelled like it could wake the dead. She set everything in front of Clara without ceremony. "Eat." "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just eat before you fall over." The soup was venison stew, rich and hot. Clara ate 3 bowls before she could bring herself to stop. Martha watched without comment, refilling the coffee cup twice. "Better?" Martha asked when Clara finally pushed back from the table. "Yes. Thank you. Again." "You've got manners, at least. That's something." Martha settled into the chair across from her, studying Clara with those sharp eyes. "So, you're the new Mrs. Blackwood?" "Apparently. And how much did our Mr. Elias tell you before dragging you up here?" Clara laughed, though it came out bitter. "Less than he should have. More than nothing." "That sounds about right. The boy's got a good heart, but he's not always smart about people." Martha poured herself coffee. "You know what you've walked into? A timber operation. 40-some employees, an aunt in Denver who's going to hate me, a house that could fit 10 families." Clara met Martha's gaze. "And apparently a whole valley full of people who are going to judge whether a miner's daughter is good enough to be here. So he did tell you some of it?" Martha's expression shifted slightly, not quite approval, but close. "Good. I was worried he'd spring it all on you at once and you'd run screaming into the night." "Still might." "Fair enough. But you made it this far." She sipped her coffee. "I'm Martha Hayes. I run this house, manage the household staff, and generally try to keep everything from falling apart. Been here since Mr. Elias's father built the place, which means I've seen just about everything this valley can throw at a person." "How long have you worked here?" 28 years come spring. Started as a cook, ended up running the whole operation when the old housekeeper died." Martha's eyes went distant for a moment. "Mr. Blackwood Sr., he was a hard man but fair. Built this company from nothing. His son, well, Elias inherited the business, but not always the instinct for it." "Meaning?" "Meaning he's better with trees than people, better with accounts than politics. And he's been trying to run everything alone since his father died, which is slowly killing him even if he won't admit it." Clara absorbed this. "So I'm what? Supposed to fix that?" "I don't know what you're supposed to do. That's between you and him." Martha stood, collecting the empty dishes. "But I'll tell you this house has been missing something for 5 years. Maybe you're it. Maybe you're not. We'll all find out together." "That's not particularly reassuring. Wasn't meant to be. I don't deal in reassurance. I deal in facts." Martha moved to the sink, her back to Clara. "Fact is, you look dead on your feet. Fact is, there's a bedroom upstairs that hasn't been used in years that's probably more comfortable than anything you've slept on recently. And fact is, tomorrow's going to come whether you're ready for it or not." "Where does Elias sleep?" "East wing, 2nd floor. You'll be in the west wing." Martha glanced back. "Separate rooms, in case you're wondering. The man might be awkward about some things, but he's not a monster." Clara felt that same loosening in her chest she'd experienced when Elias had insisted on separate bedrolls. "Good to know. Come on then. Let's get you settled before you pass out in my kitchen." The bedroom Martha led her to was absurd. A 4-poster bed dominated the space, with actual curtains that could be drawn around it. A wardrobe stood against one wall, a washstand with a porcelain basin against another. Rugs covered the wood floor, and the windows looked out over the valley, now dark except for scattered lights from the workers' village. "There's water in this pitcher, though it'll be cold by now," Martha said. "I'll have someone bring up hot water in the morning so you can wash properly. Your trunk should be up shortly. A couple of the men will bring it from the wagon." "This is too much. It's a bedroom. We've got 8 of them, most sitting empty." Martha moved toward the door. "Try to get some rest. Breakfast is at 7, but if you need to sleep later, no one's going to drag you out of bed." She left before Clara could respond. Alone, Clara moved slowly around the room, touching things like they might disappear. The bed linens were crisp and clean. The wardrobe smelled of cedar. Everything was so far removed from her life just a week ago that it felt like someone else's dream. A knock came at the door. Two young men carried in her battered trunk, setting it at the foot of the bed with barely concealed curiosity. "Evening, ma'am," one of them said. "I'm Jack. This is Henry. We work the mill mostly." "Thank you for bringing that up." They both nodded awkwardly, clearly wanting to say more but not sure how. Finally, Henry blurted out, "Is it true you're married to the boss?" "Henry," Jack hissed. "What?" Everyone's wondering. Clara almost laughed at their discomfort. "It's true, 3 days ago." "Huh." Henry processed this. Nobody knew he was courting anyone. He wasn't. It's complicated. "Everything with Mr. Blackwood's complicated," Jack said, then looked horrified he'd said it out loud. "I mean, not that he's difficult or anything, ma'am, just that he keeps things close." "I've noticed," Clara smiled slightly. "But thank you for bringing my things." They left, and she could hear them whispering urgently as they headed back down the hall. By morning, everyone in the valley would know everything those two had observed. How she looked, how she talked, what she'd said. Clara opened her trunk and stared at its meager contents. 3 dresses, all worn, her mother's quilt, 2 books, a hairbrush missing half its bristles. The sum total of her possessions, looking even more pathetic against the backdrop of this room. She pulled out the quilt and spread it across the fancy bed, a small piece of home in a place that felt entirely foreign. The first week passed in a blur of awkward introductions and barely concealed judgment. Elias had been right about the whispers. Clara felt them everywhere she went. In the kitchen, when she tried to help Martha with breakfast. In the main yard, when she walked to the workers' village. In the mill, when she made the mistake of asking how the operation worked. People were polite to her face. Too polite. The kind of artificial courtesy that was worse than open hostility because it came with smiles that never reached the eyes. "Mrs. Blackwood," they'd say, with just enough emphasis on the name to make it clear they found the title ridiculous on her. Clara tried to find her footing. She offered to help with household tasks, but Martha's staff had their routines and made it clear an outsider would just slow things down. She attempted to learn about the business, but Elias was constantly buried in ledgers and contracts, and the foreman treated her questions like amusing distractions from real work. The workers' wives were the worst. They'd gathered outside the general store one morning when Clara walked past, and their conversation had dropped to pointed whispers. One of them, a woman named Sarah with perfect blonde curls, had smiled sweetly and asked where Clara had learned to dress. "My mother taught me," Clara had replied evenly. "How lovely. And she was a seamstress?" "She was a miner's wife who made do with what we had." Sarah's smile had turned pitying. "Well, I'm sure you'll adjust to your new circumstances eventually." Clara had walked away before she said something she'd regret, but the anger had burned in her chest for hours. That night at dinner, an awkward affair where she and Elias ate at opposite ends of a table built for 20, she'd finally snapped. "This isn't working." Elias looked up from his plate. "What isn't?" "This. All of this." She gestured at the absurd dining room. "I've been here a week, and I'm completely useless. I don't know how to run a household this size. I don't understand the business. The workers think I'm a joke. The wives think I'm trash dressed up in borrowed clothes. And I'm starting to think they're right." "They're not right." "Then what am I doing here, Elias? Really? Because from where I'm sitting, I'm just taking up space in a house that has too much of it already." He set down his fork carefully. "What do you want to do?" "I want to be useful. I want to earn my place instead of just existing because I signed a paper." She leaned forward. "You said you needed a partner. Partners actually do things together. We've barely spoken since we got here." "I've been busy." "I know you've been busy. Everyone keeps telling me how busy you are, like that's supposed to explain why your wife is wandering around like a ghost nobody knows what to do with." Clara heard her voice rising and tried to pull it back. "I'm going crazy doing nothing. Give me something real to do or let me leave. I don't care which, but I can't keep living like this." The silence stretched between them. Then Elias pushed back from the table and stood. "Come with me." "Where?" "Just come." He led her through the house to a room she hadn't seen yet, a study lined with books and papers, a desk covered in ledgers and correspondence. He pulled out a chair and gestured for her to sit. "This is the business," he said, spreading papers in front of her. "Contracts, accounts, payroll, supply orders. timber prices, shipping schedules, everything that keeps 43 people employed and this valley running. Clara looked at the papers, numbers and names and dates, some in Elias's handwriting, some in others. Why are you showing me this? Because you're right. I've been treating you like a guest instead of a partner, and that was stupid. He pulled up another chair. You said you kept books for Morrison's store. Can you read these accounts? She scanned the ledger he pointed to. Income and expenses neatly columned. Yes, good. Because I'm drowning in paperwork and I could use someone who actually understands numbers instead of just pretending to. He opened another book. This is payroll. Every 2 weeks I have to calculate wages, account for advances, track who worked what hours. It takes me 6 hours every damn time, and I usually mess something up. 6 hours? Clara pulled the book closer, scanning the entries. You're doing this manually? How else would I do it? You could set up a system, templates for common calculations, standard rates instead of negotiating every time. She flipped through pages. Who's tracking inventory? Supplies, equipment replacement, that kind of thing? I am, mostly. Mostly means poorly. He laughed despite himself. Yeah, pretty much. Clara felt something shift in her chest. This, she understood. Numbers made sense. Organization had rules. This wasn't the mysterious world of timber operations or mountain living. This was just math and common sense. I could do this, she said slowly. Not all of it, but the accounts, the payroll, inventory tracking. I could set up systems that would save you hours. Would you want to? It beats sitting around being decorative. She met his eyes. But if I'm going to do this, I need actual authority. Not just copying numbers. I need to be able to make decisions about how things are organized. Done. Just like that? Just like that? The business side has been falling apart since my father died. If you can fix it, I'll be grateful. He gathered some of the papers. Start with payroll. Next cycle's in 3 days. Figure out a system that doesn't take 6 hours. Clara pulled the ledgers toward her, feeling the first spark of purpose since arriving. I'll need somewhere to work. I can't spread all this out in my bedroom. Use this room. It's technically the estate office, but I'm never in here except when I'm drowning in paperwork. Elias headed for the door. I'll let Martha know you're not to be disturbed. And Clara? Yeah? Thank you for not giving up on this yet. She wanted to say she hadn't decided whether she was giving up or not, but instead she just nodded and turned back to the numbers, losing herself in something that finally made sense. The next morning, Clara was still in the office when Martha found her. It's past 10, Martha said from the doorway. You missed breakfast. I wasn't hungry. Clara didn't look up from the ledger she was reorganizing. Did you know Elias has been paying Henry Watts and Henry Watson the same rate even though Watson has been here 3 years longer? Can't say I paid it much attention. Well, he has, and that's probably why Watson's been making noise about leaving. Clara made a note in the margin. Also, someone's been ordering twice as much lamp oil as we actually use. Either we've got a leak somewhere or someone's skimming. Martha moved closer, peering at the papers. You figured all that out in one night? Most of the night, yes. These books are a mess, Martha. There's no system. Half the entries are incomplete. The categorization is inconsistent. Clara stopped herself. Sorry, I get intense about this stuff. Don't apologize. It's good to see someone actually interested in how this place runs. Martha set down a plate she'd been carrying. Brought you food anyway. You can't reorganize an entire business operation on an empty stomach. Clara ate while she worked, barely tasting the food. By noon, she had 3 pages of notes about inefficiencies and problems. By evening, she'd drafted a new payroll system that cut the calculation time by more than half. When Elias came to find her around 7, she'd moved on to inventory. Clara, you need to stop and eat properly. In a minute. I'm almost done with equipment tracking. You said that 2 hours ago. Martha told me. Clara looked up, surprised to find the room had gone dark except for the lamp at her desk. What time is it? Time for you to take a break before you go blind. He moved around the desk and physically closed the ledger she was working on. Come on. Dinner. Then you can tell me everything you found. She wanted to argue, but her back was screaming from hunching over the desk all day. Fine, but I'm bringing my notes. Dinner that night was different. Instead of sitting at opposite ends of the ridiculous table, Elias cleared one end and they sat close enough to actually talk. Clara spread out her findings, walking him through each problem she'd identified. The lamp oil thing might be Henderson, Elias said when she got to that point. He runs the supply shed, and I've wondered about him before. So confront him. It's not that simple. His brother works the mill. His father worked for my father. If I accuse him without proof, then get proof. Set up a tracking system. Count what goes in, count what gets used, compare the numbers. Clara tapped her notes. This is basic stuff, Elias. You don't need to accuse anyone. Just make it impossible to hide. He stared at her. That's actually brilliant. It's common sense. Same thing. He leaned back, something like relief crossing his face. You know what? I think this might actually work. You doing this, I mean. Don't sound so surprised. I'm not surprised you're capable. I'm surprised I didn't think of bringing you in on this sooner. He smiled. Turns out marrying someone smart was a good decision. Clara felt her cheeks warm. Well, don't celebrate yet. Wait until I actually fix something. But over the next 2 weeks, she did fix things. She reorganized the entire accounting system, implemented the new payroll structure, and caught 3 separate instances of supply waste that were costing the company money. The lamp oil situation resolved itself when Henderson suddenly requested a transfer to different duties. Word spread through the valley. The new Mrs. Blackwood wasn't just decorative, she actually knew what she was doing. The whispers changed. Not friendly exactly, but less dismissive. People started bringing her problems instead of taking them to Elias. A mill worker mentioned a scheduling conflict. A supplier sent a bill that didn't match the order. The cook wanted to know if they could afford better ingredients. Clara handled it all, and slowly the valley began to accept that she might actually belong there. Then Eleanor Blackwood arrived from Denver, and everything went to hell. The telegram came on a Tuesday. Martha brought it to the office where Clara was working on quarterly projections. This came from Mr. Blackwood, but he's up at the North Timber site. Won't be back until tomorrow. Martha handed over the paper. You should probably read it. Clara unfolded the telegram. The message was brief and cold. Arriving Thursday. Stop. Business matters require immediate attention. Stop Eleanor Blackwood. Who's Eleanor Blackwood? Clara asked, though something in her gut already knew the answer. Mr. Elias's aunt, his father's sister. She handles the Denver office, investor relations, contracts, that sort of thing. Martha's expression had gone carefully neutral. She's formidable. You mean she's going to hate me? I mean she's going to judge you, and her standards are exacting. Martha collected the telegram. I'll make sure the guest rooms are prepared. You might want to tell Elias when he gets back. Tell him what? That his aunt is coming to inspect his inappropriate wife? Something like that, yes. Elias returned late Wednesday night, covered in sawdust and looking exhausted. Clara met him in the entrance hall. Your aunt's coming tomorrow. He froze mid-step. What? Eleanor Blackwood. Telegram came yesterday. She'll be here tomorrow, and she sounds thrilled about it. Damn. He scrubbed a hand over his face. I was hoping to have more time before she found out about you. Well, time's up. What do I need to know? Eleanor is... He struggled for words. She's smart, ruthless, and she's had very specific ideas about who I should marry since I was 15. Those ideas did not include a woman from a mining town I met 3 weeks ago. So she's going to try to get rid of me. She's going to try a lot of things. Getting rid of you is probably on the list. He met Clara's eyes. Can you handle condescension? Because she's very good at it. I've been handling it since I got here. Not like this. Eleanor doesn't do subtle judgment. She goes straight for the throat. Clara straightened her shoulders. Then I guess I'd better figure out how to fight back. Eleanor Blackwood arrived Thursday afternoon in a carriage so expensive it probably cost more than Clara's entire childhood cabin. She emerged like royalty descending to inspect peasants, tall, perfectly dressed in the kind of traveling suit that belonged in society pages, with silver hair arranged in a style that probably required a professional. Clara watched from the office window as Elias went out to greet her. She couldn't hear the conversation, but she could read body language. Eleanor's posture screamed disapproval. Elias's shoulders had gone tense. Martha appeared at Clara's elbow. Best get it over with. I know. And don't let her rattle you. She's going to try. Clara smoothed down her dress. One of three she owned, mended but clean, and headed downstairs. Eleanor was in the sitting room when Clara entered, examining the space like she was cataloging everything wrong with it. She turned when Clara appeared, and her gaze was surgical. "So," Eleanor said, "you're the girl. Not wife, not Clara. Girl. I'm Clara Whitmore. Mercer now, I suppose." She kept her voice even. "You must be Mrs. Blackwood." "I am, though I prefer Miss Blackwood. I never saw the point in marriage." Eleanor's smile was sharp, unlike some people who seem to have rushed into it. "Eleanor," Elias warned, entering behind Clara. "What? I'm simply making conversation with your new bride." Eleanor settled onto a settee like she owned it. "Tell me, Clara, how long have you and my nephew known each other?" Here it was. The trap. If she lied, Eleanor would catch it. If she told the truth, she'd sound desperate or calculating. Clara chose truth. 3 weeks. 3 weeks. Eleanor's eyebrows rose. How whirlwind. And where did you meet? He came to my cabin, offered to pay my father's debts in exchange for marriage. I accepted. Dead silence. Elias looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. Eleanor's expression had gone from condescending to outraged. You bought her? Eleanor's voice could have cut glass. I offered a practical arrangement, Elias said tightly. Clara needed help. I needed a wife young enough to be easily manipulated? Eleanor stood. What on earth were you thinking? I was thinking I was tired of being alone, tired of women who only saw my bank account, tired of... So you went shopping for poverty? Eleanor turned to Clara. And you? What were you thinking? Or were you simply seizing an opportunity to escape whatever backwater you crawled out of? Eleanor, that's enough. It's fine, Clara cut in, surprised by how steady her voice was. She's right to ask. She moved into the room, meeting Eleanor's gaze directly. You want to know what I was thinking? I was thinking my father was dying, and we had $14 to our name. I was thinking debt collectors were circling, and I had exactly 2 options: marry someone I didn't know or end up in a Denver brothel. So yes, I seized an opportunity. I'm not ashamed of that. You should be, Eleanor said coldly. You've attached yourself to a man of means through manipulation. I attached myself to a man who made an offer. He could have backed out at any point. He didn't. Clara felt anger rising but kept it controlled. And for the record, I've earned my place here. I've reorganized his entire accounting system, caught supply waste that was bleeding money, and implemented efficiency improvements that have saved the company thousands. So if you want to call me a gold digger, fine, but at least acknowledge I'm a useful one. Eleanor blinked, clearly not expecting that response. She's not wrong, Elias added. Claire's done more for the business side in 3 weeks than I managed in 3 years. That's not the point. Then what is the point? Clara demanded. Because from where I'm standing, it seems like you're more concerned with social standing than actual competence. The point is that my nephew is the head of a timber empire worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. He needs a wife who can navigate society, manage investor relations, represent the company in Denver circles. Eleanor's gaze raked over Clara. Not someone who learned numbers at a general store counter. And how's that been working out? Clara shot back. Because from what I can see, the business has been struggling for years. Maybe what it needs isn't another society wife who knows which fork to use. Maybe it needs someone who actually understands work. The room went silent. Then, shockingly, Eleanor laughed. It wasn't a kind laugh, but it was genuine. Well, at least you have a spine. She settled back onto the settee. That's more than I can say for the last 3 women who tried to catch Elias's attention. Eleanor, Elias started. Oh, quiet. I'm reassessing. Eleanor studied Clara with new interest. You're smarter than you look. I'll give you that. And if Elias says you've improved the accounts, I believe him. He's terrible at lying. So what happens now? Clara asked. Now? Now we see if you can survive in the real world. Eleanor's smile turned calculating. The governor's winter reception is in 2 weeks, in Denver. Every important investor, politician, and business leader in the territory will be there. If you're truly going to be Elias's wife, you'll need to attend. Clara's stomach dropped. A Denver reception. Exactly. Black tie, proper etiquette, social maneuvering, all the things you've never experienced. Eleanor's eyes glittered. I suggest you start preparing. Because if you embarrass yourself, and by extension, this family, in front of the governor, I'll make sure you regret it. She stood, smoothing her skirts. I'll be staying through the weekend to observe your competencies. We'll discuss the reception details tomorrow. Eleanor swept out of the room, leaving Clara and Elias staring after her. Well, Clara said after a moment, that went better than expected. Better? Elias looked at her like she was insane. She just threatened you and set up a public humiliation. She also acknowledged I have a spine and told me to prepare instead of just dismissing me outright. Clara moved to the window, watching Eleanor's carriage being unloaded. I can work with grudging respect. It's better than being ignored. Clara, you don't have to do this. The reception, we can make an excuse. No. She turned to face him. If I'm going to be here, I need to prove I belong. Not just to the workers or to you. To everyone who thinks I'm not good enough. She straightened her shoulders. So I'll go to the damn reception, and I'll figure out how to survive it. Elias crossed the room and took her hands. It was the first time he'd touched her since they'd arrived at Winter Hollow, and Clara felt the warmth of it down to her bones. You don't have to prove anything, he said quietly. Yes, I do. To myself, if nothing else. She squeezed his hands. But I can't do it alone. If Eleanor is going to turn this into a test, I'm going to need help passing it. What kind of help? The kind where you teach me how to navigate your world without looking like a complete fraud. She smiled grimly. Think you're up for that? He smiled back, something fierce in his eyes. Yeah, I think I am. The next 2 weeks felt like preparing for war. Eleanor turned the house into a training ground, critiquing everything from how Clara held a teacup to the way she entered a room. She was merciless, surgical in her observations, and occasionally grudgingly impressed when Clara picked something up quickly. Your posture is improving, Eleanor said one morning as Clara practiced walking with a book balanced on her head, an absurd exercise that somehow actually worked. Though you still lead with your shoulders like you're expecting a fight. Old habit, Clara said, keeping her eyes forward. Well, break it. In Denver society, aggression is expressed through smiles and carefully chosen words, not body language. Eleanor circled her like a predator. Again, from the door. Clara walked the length of the sitting room for the 20th time that morning, trying to embody whatever the hell Eleanor meant by graceful but not submissive. It felt like performing a part in a play she'd never rehearsed. Better. Eleanor tapped her walking stick against the floor. Now, tell me what you know about territorial politics. Almost nothing. At least you're honest. Eleanor settled into her chair. The governor, Marcus Whitfield, is a moderate who's trying to balance mining interests, agricultural concerns, and the growing timber industry. He's popular enough but weak when it comes to making hard decisions. His wife, Caroline, is the real power. Win her over, and you'll survive the evening. Antagonize her, and you're finished. Clara committed the names to memory. How do I win her over? You don't, not directly. Caroline Whitfield doesn't befriend women she perceives as beneath her station. But she respects competence. Eleanor's gaze sharpened. So when someone tries to trap you in conversation about things you don't know, redirect to things you do. Business, accounts, practical matters. Make yourself useful instead of decorative. I can do that. We'll see. The evenings were different. While Eleanor retired to her rooms with correspondence and business papers, Elias took over Clara's education. But his lessons were less about etiquette and more about survival. The men at these events will try to corner you, he said one night as they sat in his study, a fire crackling in the hearth. They'll ask questions designed to make you look stupid or to get information they can use against the company. Like what? Like timber projections, contract details, anything that gives them an edge in negotiations. He poured them both whiskey, a habit Clara had developed over the past week. Your best defense is to smile and claim ignorance. Let them think you're just a pretty face who doesn't understand business. But I do understand business. You've been teaching me for weeks. Exactly. That's your advantage. They'll underestimate you, and you'll actually know what they're fishing for. Elias leaned back in his chair. Eleanor's method is about fitting in. Mine is about using their assumptions against them. Clara sipped the whiskey, feeling it burn down her throat. You two have very different approaches. Eleanor believes in playing by society's rules to gain power within the system. I believe the system is rigged and the best you can do is not let it crush you completely. He smiled slightly. We've been arguing about it for years. Who's usually right? Depends on the situation. Tonight she's right that you need to know the basics. Tomorrow, I'll be right that knowing when to break the rules matters more. They talked late into those nights, Clara learning not just about Denver's society, but about Elias himself. She discovered he'd wanted to be an architect before his father died, and the company became his responsibility. That he hated crowds but forced himself into them anyway. That he'd been engaged once to a woman who'd called off the wedding 3 days before because she couldn't imagine living anywhere but a city. Sarah, Clara said, remembering the name from their first night camping. The one who visited here and cried for 3 days. That's the one. Elias refilled their glasses. I thought I loved her. Turns out I loved the idea of not being alone more than I actually loved her. Is that what I am? Another attempt at not being alone? He looked at her for a long moment. Honestly, I don't know yet. I know I like having you here. I know the house feels less empty. I know I'd rather spend evenings talking to you than sitting in silence. He paused. Is that enough? Clara thought about it. For now, maybe. Ask me again after I survive this reception. Deal. The dress arrived a week before they were supposed to leave for Denver. Eleanor had it made by some fancy seamstress in the city, and when Martha brought it to Clara's room, she stared at it like it might bite. Go on, Martha urged. Try it on. The fabric was deep blue silk, cut in a style Clara had only seen in magazine illustrations. It probably cost more than her father had made in a year of mine work. I can't wear this. Why not? Because I'll spill something on it, or trip, or... Clara gestured helplessly. I'm not the kind of person who wears dresses like this, Martha. You are now, whether you like it or not. Martha's voice softened. I know it's uncomfortable, wearing someone else's life like a costume, but you're not pretending to be someone you're not. You're just showing a different side of who you actually are. What if I don't have that side? Then you'll fake it until you do. That's what everyone in Denver's doing anyway. Martha held out the dress. Come on, let's see how it fits. It fit perfectly, which somehow made it worse. Clara stared at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. The dress made her look elegant, refined, like someone who belonged at a governor's reception, like someone who'd never buried her father with bleeding hands. You look beautiful, Martha said. I look like I'm playing dress-up. Everyone's playing dress-up, dear. The difference is most of them don't know it. Eleanor inspected the dress that evening with a critical eye, making Clara turn slowly while she examined every seam and fold. Acceptable, she finally declared. The seamstress followed my instructions precisely. You won't embarrass yourself on appearance alone. High praise, Clara muttered. Don't be sullen. It doesn't suit you. Eleanor gestured for her to sit. Now, we need to discuss the real danger of this event. I thought the whole thing was dangerous. The social elements are manageable if you remember your training. The real threat is political. Eleanor pulled out a sheaf of papers. The Blackwood Timber Company has enemies, Clara. Business rivals who'd love to see us fail. Investors who want more control than we're willing to give. And politicians who take money from those rivals. What does that have to do with me? Everything. Because you're new. You're vulnerable. They'll use you to get to Elias. Eleanor spread the papers on the table. These are the primary threats. Victor Ashford runs the largest competing timber operation in the territory. He's been trying to buy us out for 3 years. He'll be at the reception, and he'll absolutely try to corner you. Clara studied the name. What does he want? Information? Leverage? Anything he can use to weaken our position. Eleanor pulled out another paper. Then there's James Crawford. He's on the Territorial Development Board, and he's pushing for regulations that would cripple our operations while benefiting the railroad companies he's invested in. Let me guess, he'll also be there, along with his wife, who's a vicious gossip, and his business partners, who are all looking for ways to consolidate power. Eleanor met Clara's eyes. The governor's reception isn't just a party, it's a battlefield where the wars are fought with champagne and carefully phrased questions, and you're walking into it as a target. That's reassuring. It's realistic. If you're going to survive, you need to understand what you're facing. Eleanor tapped the papers. Study these. Learn the names, the connections, the angles. When someone approaches you, know what they really want before they finish their first sentence. Clara spent the next 3 days memorizing those papers. Victor Ashford, timber baron and ruthless competitor. James Crawford, politician with railroad interests. Caroline Whitfield, the governor's wife who controlled access and influence. A dozen other names, each with their own agendas and pressure points. She drilled with Eleanor on responses, practiced deflections, learned how to answer questions without actually answering them. Her brain felt like it was cramping from holding so much information that felt completely foreign to everything she'd ever known. The night before they left for Denver, Clara found herself too anxious to sleep. She wandered down to the kitchen around midnight, hoping warm milk might help, and found Elias already there. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. "Too much spinning in my head." She sat across from him at the work table. "What if I forget everything? What if I say the wrong thing to the wrong person and ruin everything? Then we deal with it and move on." "Easy for you to say. You've been doing this your whole life." "And I still mess it up regularly." He slid a glass toward her. Whiskey, not milk. "Last year I accidentally insulted the head of the Territorial Banking Association because I didn't realize his wife had just left him for his business partner. Spent the next 6 months trying to repair that relationship." Clara sipped the whiskey. "How'd you manage?" "I didn't. Eleanor did. She's better at this stuff than I'll ever be." He smiled slightly. "Which is why she's coming with us. If things go wrong, she'll handle it." "I thought the whole point was for me to handle it. The point is for you to survive it. Handling it is a bonus." Elias reached across the table and took her hand. "Clara, listen to me. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to show up and not let them destroy you. That's all anyone can do in these situations." "What if they do destroy me?" "They won't. You're too stubborn." His grip tightened. "You survived poverty, your father's death, and Eleanor's training. A bunch of rich people in fancy clothes have nothing on that." She wanted to believe him, but the anxiety still churned in her stomach like bad food. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly. "Good. Fear keeps you sharp." He stood, pulling her up with him. "Come on. I want to show you something." He led her through the dark house and up to the 3rd floor, to a room she'd never entered. Inside was a telescope pointed out a massive window toward the valley. "My father had this installed when I was a kid," Elias said, adjusting the telescope. He said that whenever business got overwhelming, he'd come up here and look at the stars. Reminded him that most of our problems are pretty small in the grand scheme of things. Clara looked through the telescope. The stars were impossibly bright, sharp points of light against the darkness. "Do you believe that?" she asked. "That our problems are small?" "No. I think our problems are exactly as big as they feel, but sometimes it helps to remember there's more to the world than whatever's crushing us at the moment." He stood beside her. "Tomorrow's going to be hard. You're going to feel out of place and judged and probably angry about half of it. But then it'll be over, and we'll come back here, and life will keep going. Unless I completely destroy your reputation and tank the company. Even then, life goes on. Maybe different than we planned, but it goes on." He turned her to face him. "I'm not going to let them break you, Clara, I promise. You might not have a choice. Then we'll both be broken. At least we won't be alone." She laughed despite herself, the sound coming out slightly hysterical. "That's a terrible reassurance." "I'm not good at reassurance. I'm good at honesty." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You're going to be fine. And if you're not, we'll figure it out together." Clara leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his chest. It was the first time they'd been this close since signing the contract, and part of her wanted to stay there indefinitely. But morning came anyway, as it always did. The train to Denver took 6 hours. Clara spent most of it staring out the window, watching the mountains give way to foothills and then to the sprawl of the city. Eleanor quizzed her periodically on names and connections, but mostly left her alone. Elias worked on papers in the seat across from her, occasionally glancing up to offer an encouraging smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He was nervous too, Clara realized. Maybe not about the same things, but nervous nonetheless. Denver was loud and crowded and overwhelming. They took a carriage to a hotel that was somehow even fancier than the house at Winter Hollow. Clara's room had a bathroom with running water and a bed so soft she felt like she was sinking. "Rest," Eleanor ordered when they arrived. "The reception starts at 7. That gives you 4 hours to compose yourself." Clara tried to rest but ended up pacing her room, practicing introductions in the mirror and feeling increasingly ridiculous. At 6, Martha arrived to help her dress. Eleanor had insisted Martha come along for moral support and practical assistance. "Stop fidgeting," Martha said as she worked on Clara's hair. "You'll mess up the pins." "Sorry, I can't help it." "You're going to be fine. Better than fine. You're going to show all those fancy people what a real woman looks like. A real woman who's terrified? A real woman who does hard things anyway." Martha secured the last pin and turned Clara to face the mirror. "There. Perfect." Clara barely recognized herself. The blue silk dress fit like it was made for her, which it was. Her hair was arranged in a style that looked effortless but had taken Martha 30 minutes to achieve. She looked like she belonged at a governor's reception. She looked like someone else entirely. Elias was waiting in the hotel lobby, dressed in formal evening wear that made him look dangerous and elegant at the same time. He stopped mid-conversation with Eleanor when Clara descended the stairs. "You look—" He seemed to lose words. "Good. Really good." Eleanor rolled her eyes. "Eloquent as always, nephew. Clara, you look appropriate for the occasion. Try to maintain that appearance throughout the evening." She gestured toward the door. "Shall we?" The governor's mansion was lit up like a jewel box, every window glowing warm against the dark. Carriages lined the drive, depositing elegantly dressed couples who moved toward the entrance in a glittering stream. Clara's hands started sweating inside her gloves. "Breathe," Elias murmured beside her. "Just breathe, and remember everything we practiced." "And if I forget?" "Then make something up. Half of what people say at these things is complete nonsense anyway." Eleanor led them through the entrance into a ballroom that made Clara's breath catch. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings painted with elaborate murals. Musicians played in one corner. Servants circulated with trays of champagne and delicate foods Clara couldn't identify. And everywhere, people. Beautiful people in expensive clothes, talking and laughing and sizing each other up with practiced glances. "Mr. Blackwood," a voice called out. A portly man in evening dress approached, smiling widely. "Good to see you made it down from the mountains." "Mr. Morrison, pleasure." Elias shook his hand smoothly. "May I introduce my wife, Clara?" "Clara, this is Thomas Morrison. He's on the Territorial Development Board." Clara extended her hand, remembering Eleanor's lessons. "Mr. Morrison, how nice to meet you." Morrison took her hand, but his eyes were calculating. "Mrs. Blackwood, what a surprise. I didn't know Elias had married." "It was recent." "How recent?" "Recent enough that we're still getting used to the idea ourselves," Elias interjected smoothly. "If you'll excuse us, we should greet the governor." They moved away before Morrison could press further, but Clara could feel his eyes following them. "He's already spreading gossip," she muttered. "Let him. By the end of the night, everyone will know anyway." Elias guided her toward a couple standing near the center of the room. "That's Governor Whitfield and his wife Caroline. Smile, be polite, and let Eleanor do most of the talking." The governor was exactly as Eleanor had described, moderate, pleasant, utterly unremarkable. But his wife was something else. Caroline Whitfield had the kind of beauty that came from money and maintenance, and her eyes missed nothing as Eleanor made introductions. "Mrs. Blackwood," Caroline said, her voice cool. "What an unexpected pleasure. Eleanor, you didn't mention Elias had taken a wife." "It was a recent development," Eleanor replied smoothly. "Clara's been managing the business accounts at Winter Hollow, quite successfully, I might add." "How practical." Caroline's gaze assessed Clara like she was livestock at auction. "And where are you from, my dear?" Here it was, the first test. "The mining district," Clara said evenly. "My father worked the goldfields." "How rustic." Caroline's smile never reached her eyes. "And now you find yourself managing accounts for a timber empire. Quite the change in circumstances." "I find numbers more forgiving than people," Clara said. "They add up the same way regardless of where you learned them." Something flickered in Caroline's expression. Not quite respect, but close. "Indeed. Perhaps we'll have a chance to speak more later. I'd love to hear about these accounting improvements Eleanor mentioned." They moved on, and Clara felt like she'd just passed the first hurdle by a hair's breadth. "Well done," Eleanor murmured. "You didn't grovel or get defensive. Keep that up." But the night was young, and the tests kept coming. A railroad investor asked pointed questions about timber yields that were clearly designed to extract competitive information. Clara smiled and claimed ignorance while mentally cataloging everything he revealed about his own interests. A society woman made a comment about Clara's dress being lovely for someone of her background. Clara thanked her and mentioned that good tailoring made anyone look presentable, implying the woman's own dress wasn't as impressive as she thought. Victor Ashford himself cornered them near the champagne table, all false charm and sharp eyes. "Blackwood," he said, shaking Elias's hand too firmly. "Heard you got married. Congratulations." "Ashford, thank you. And this must be the lucky lady." Ashford turned his attention to Clara. "Victor Ashford. I run Ashford Timber and Transport." "I know who you are, Mr. Ashford," Clara said. "Your company's been trying to acquire my husband's operations for several years." Ashford's smile froze slightly. "Well, someone's done her homework. I manage the accounts. I read the rejection letters." Clara accepted a champagne glass from a passing server. 15 offers in 3 years. All declined. That must be frustrating. "Business is business, Mrs. Blackwood. No hard feelings." "Of course not. Though I'm curious why you keep offering when the answer's consistently no." "Perhaps I'm hoping circumstances will change." His gaze sharpened. "Companies evolve, leadership changes, new perspectives emerge. Or perhaps you're hoping we'll get desperate enough to sell at a loss," Clara replied sweetly. "Either way, I'm afraid you'll be disappointed. Our numbers are quite strong this quarter." Ashford's expression went cold. Strong numbers can change quickly in this industry. Equipment failures, labor problems, unfortunate accidents. "Is that a threat, Mr. Ashford?" "Merely an observation about the risks inherent in timber operations." He smiled, all teeth. "Enjoy the evening, Mrs. Blackwood. I have a feeling we'll be seeing more of each other." He walked away, leaving Clara's heart pounding. "That was either brilliant or suicidal," Elias said quietly. "I'm not sure which." "He threatened you, our operations. I wasn't going to just smile and nod." "I know. And honestly, it was brilliant." He touched her elbow gently. "But we should probably avoid him for the rest of the night." They did, but the damage was done. Clara caught Ashford watching them from across the room multiple times, his expression thoughtful and calculating. By 10 o'clock, Clara's feet hurt from the unfamiliar shoes, and her face ached from maintaining a pleasant expression. She'd deflected questions, handled subtle insults, and navigated conversations that felt like verbal chess matches. Then James Crawford appeared, the politician with railroad interests, accompanied by a severe-looking woman Eleanor had identified as his wife. "Blackwood," Crawford said without preamble, "we need to discuss the proposed forestry regulations." "This isn't really the time," Elias started. "It's exactly the time. These regulations are coming whether you like it or not. The question is whether you're going to fight them or get on board." Crawford's voice carried that particular tone politicians used when they wanted witnesses to their reasonableness. "Your operations practices are exactly the kind of reckless exploitation we're trying to prevent." "Our practices are sustainable and responsible," Elias replied, his voice tight. "We replant, we rotate cuts, we don't strip land bare like some operations." "That's not what I've heard." Crawford pulled a paper from his jacket. "According to reports, you've exceeded recommended harvesting limits in 3 sectors this year alone." "Those reports are wrong." "Are they?" Crawford looked at Clara. "Perhaps your wife can clarify. She manages the accounts, I understand. What are the actual harvest numbers for the North Sector, Mrs. Blackwood?" Every eye in their vicinity turned to Clara. This was the trap Eleanor had warned about, being put on the spot with numbers she might not know, making her look incompetent or exposing information that could be used against them. But Clara had spent weeks buried in those accounts. She knew every number, every sector, every calculation. "The North Sector yielded 47,000 board feet this quarter," she said calmly, "which is well within the sustainable limit of 52,000 for that rotation cycle. The reports you're citing incorrectly combined our numbers with Ashford Timber's operations in the adjacent sector. Different companies, Mr. Crawford. Different practices." Crawford's expression flickered. The reports clearly stated the reports were either deliberately misleading or incompetently researched. I can provide you with our actual logging records if you'd like to verify." Clara smiled pleasantly. Though I suspect whoever gave you those numbers knew exactly what they were doing when they conflated our operations with our competitors. A small crowd had gathered now, drawn by the confrontation. Caroline Whitfield stood at the edge, watching with interested eyes. "Who gave you those reports, James?" she asked coolly. Crawford's face had gone red. "That's confidential." "Was it Victor Ashford?" Clara pressed. "Because he has a vested interest in making our company look reckless to regulators. Easier to push through restrictions that hurt us while his operations continue unchanged. That's a serious accusation." "It's a logical conclusion based on who benefits from false reporting." Clara kept her voice level. "Our company follows every regulation currently on the books. We employ 43 people with fair wages and safe conditions. We replant 3 trees for every one we cut. If you want to regulate the industry, Mr. Crawford, start with the companies actually causing harm, not the ones trying to do it right." The silence that followed felt immense. Crawford looked like he wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. His wife touched his arm, murmuring something Clara couldn't hear. Then Caroline Whitfield started clapping. It was slow, deliberate applause that made everyone turn to look at her. "Well said, Mrs. Blackwood," Caroline said, her expression genuinely amused for the first time that evening. "I appreciate someone who can defend their position with actual facts rather than empty rhetoric." She gave Crawford a pointed look. "James, perhaps we should discuss the source of your reports more carefully before the next board meeting." Crawford muttered something about needing air and retreated, his wife trailing after him. The crowd dispersed slowly, whispers spreading like ripples. Eleanor appeared at Clara's elbow. "That was reckless." "It was necessary. He was trying to publicly corner us. And you publicly humiliated a territorial board member." But Eleanor's eyes gleamed. "Reckless and effective. Well done." The rest of the evening passed in a blur. People who'd ignored Clara earlier suddenly wanted to talk to her. Caroline Whitfield pulled her aside for a private conversation about the challenges of managing business operations with incompetent men constantly interfering. The governor himself mentioned that the territory could use more voices like hers on advisory councils. By the time they left around midnight, Clara felt like she'd run a marathon. In the carriage back to the hotel, she collapsed against the seat, every muscle screaming. "You survived," Elias said, smiling. "Barely." "No, decisively." He took her hand. "You didn't just survive, you won." "I made enemies." "You made the right enemies. Crawford and Ashford were already against us. Now everyone knows they're willing to use false information to push their agendas." Elias squeezed her hand. "You changed how people see both you and the company tonight. That matters." Eleanor nodded from her seat. "He's right. Caroline Whitfield doesn't respect many people. The fact that she publicly supported you means you have real credibility now." She looked at Clara with something that might have been approval. "You exceeded my expectations, Clara, significantly." Clara wanted to feel triumphant. Instead, she just felt exhausted, overwhelmed, and slightly sick from champagne and adrenaline. "Can we never do that again?" she asked weakly. "Absolutely not," Eleanor said. "You're attending every major event from now on. You're too useful to leave at home." That's what I was afraid of. But as they returned to the hotel and Clara finally got out of the torturous dress and into bed, she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. She'd walked into a ballroom full of people waiting to tear her apart, and she'd walked out standing taller than when she'd entered. Maybe she actually could survive this life after all. The telegram arrived 3 days after they returned to Winter Hollow. Clara was in the office reviewing the quarterly projections when Martha brought it in, her expression troubled. "This came for you, not Mr. Blackwood, you specifically." Clara took the paper, her stomach tightening. Telegrams addressed to her directly were never good news. Proposal accepted. Stop. Governor Whitfield requests your participation on Territorial Forestry Advisory Council. Stop. First meeting, March 15th, Denver. Stop. Congratulations, stop, Caroline Whitfield. She read it 3 times, certain she was missing something. "What is it?" Martha asked. "I think I just got offered a position on a government council." Clara looked up, bewildered. "That's not possible. I've been here 2 months. I barely survived 1 reception." "Let me see." Martha read the telegram and smiled. "Well, Looks like you impressed more people than you thought. Elias's reaction when Clara showed him the telegram was equally stunned. The advisory council, he repeated, staring at the paper like it might change if he looked long enough. Clara, that's a real position, with actual influence over territorial policy. I know what it is. I don't know why they're offering it to me. Because you proved you know what you're talking about. Because you publicly exposed Crawford's false reporting. Because Caroline Whitfield doesn't waste time on people she doesn't respect. He set down the telegram. Are you going to accept? Should I? That's not my decision to make. Clara moved to the window, looking out over the valley. Snow had started falling again, covering everything in fresh white. If I accept, it means going to Denver regularly, dealing with politics and bureaucrats and people like Crawford who'll try to undermine everything I say. Yes? And if I don't accept, I'll always wonder if I could have made a difference, if I gave up the chance to actually protect what we're building here. Also, yes. Elias came to stand beside her. For what it's worth, I think you should do it. Not because I need you to, but because you'd be good at it. And because you've spent your whole life having other people make decisions for you. This is your chance to make them yourself. She looked at him. What if I fail? Then you fail, and we figure out what comes next. He smiled slightly. Seems to be our pattern. Clara sent her acceptance that afternoon. The backlash came faster than she expected. Within a week, rumors started circulating through Denver social circles that Clara had manipulated her way onto the council through her connection to Caroline Whitfield, that she was unqualified, uneducated, a mountain girl playing at politics. Eleanor arrived at Winter Hollow with a stack of newspaper clippings, each one more vicious than the last. New Mrs. Blackwood's questionable credentials, one headline read. From mining camp to government advisor, a dangerous precedent, declared another. This is Victor Ashford's doing, Eleanor said, spreading the clippings across the dining table. And probably Crawford. They're trying to undermine your credibility before you even attend your first meeting. Clara read through the articles, feeling anger build with each fabricated quote and insinuation. They're saying I can barely read, that I married Elias specifically to gain political influence, that I'm a... She stopped, unable to repeat some of the more colorful descriptions. They're saying whatever they think will stick, Eleanor said bluntly. The question is what you're going to do about it. What can I do? Deny it and look defensive? Ignore it and let the lies spread? Neither. Eleanor pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. You're going to write a response, not defensive, not apologetic, factual, and devastating. Over the next 2 days, Clara and Eleanor crafted a letter to the editor of Denver's largest newspaper. It detailed Clara's actual background, daughter of a mine worker, yes, but also someone who'd managed accounts and debt negotiations from age 16. It listed the specific improvements she'd made to Blackwood Timber's operations, with numbers Eleanor verified independently. It challenged anyone questioning her credentials to review the company's financial records, which showed consistent growth under her management. The final paragraph was Eleanor's addition, and it was surgical in its precision. Those questioning my qualifications might better spend their time examining why false timber yield reports were presented to Territorial Board member James Crawford. As a member of the new advisory council, I look forward to ensuring such errors don't influence future policy decisions. The letter ran in 3 major newspapers. The response was immediate and divided. Some praised Clara's directness and transparency. Others doubled down on their attacks, calling her arrogant and unsuitable. But the conversation had shifted from whether she deserved the position to whether the people attacking her had their own agendas. You've made yourself a target, Elias said one evening as they reviewed the latest round of editorials. A bigger one than before. I was already a target. Now at least I'm fighting back. Clarice, he stopped, choosing his words carefully. I need you to understand what you're walking into. This isn't just business competition anymore. This is territorial politics. People have gotten killed over lumber contracts and railroad routes. Are you saying I should step down? I'm saying I'm worried about you. There's a difference between being tough and being reckless. She set down the paper she'd been reading. Do you want me to quit the council? No, I want you to be careful. I want you to have security when you go to Denver. I want you to understand that some of these men won't just try to embarrass you. They'll try to destroy you completely. Then I'll have to make sure they fail. Clara moved to where he sat and took his hands. I know this is dangerous. I know I'm in over my head in a lot of ways. But for the first time in my life, I'm doing something that matters beyond just surviving. I can't walk away from that. Elias pulled her closer, his forehead resting against hers. I know. Just promise me you won't do it alone. Let me help. Let Eleanor help. Let the people who actually care about you watch your back. I promise. The first council meeting was scheduled for mid-March. Clara traveled to Denver with Elias and 2 men from Winter Hollow, who Elias trusted for security. Eleanor met them at the hotel with a final briefing. Crawford will try to dominate the conversation, she said. Ashford's people will be watching from the gallery. Caroline Whitfield will be chairing, which helps, but she can't protect you from direct challenges. I don't need protection. I need to do my job. Your job is to survive long enough to actually influence policy. Eleanor's voice was sharp. Don't confuse stubbornness with strategy, Clara. The meeting took place in a government building that smelled of old wood and ambition. The council chamber was smaller than Clara expected, with a curved table where 7 members would sit and a gallery for observers. Clara took her designated seat, acutely aware of the eyes watching from the gallery. She dressed carefully in a severe gray suit that Eleanor had helped select, professional, authoritative, completely unlike the silk dress from the governor's reception. Caroline Whitfield called the meeting to order with brisk efficiency. We have several items on today's agenda. First, the proposed revisions to timber harvesting regulations in mountain territories. James Crawford immediately seized the floor. Before we begin detailed discussion, I'd like to address the elephant in the room. We have a new council member with no formal education in forestry, environmental policy, or territorial governance. I question whether your objection is noted and overruled, Caroline cut him off. Mrs. Blackwood was appointed based on her demonstrated expertise in sustainable timber operations and resource management. If you have specific concerns about her qualifications, submit them in writing. We're here to discuss policy, not personnel. Crawford's jaw tightened, but he sat back. The meeting proceeded, and Clara quickly understood why Eleanor had been so insistent on preparation. The discussion was dense with technical language and political maneuvering. Crawford pushed hard for regulations that would have severely limited small to mid-size operations while leaving loopholes for larger companies. Another council member, clearly allied with railroad interests, kept steering conversation toward access rights and transportation corridors. Clara waited, listening, learning the rhythm of the debate. Then Caroline asked for input on sustainable yield calculations, the exact issue that had come up at the reception. Mrs. Blackwood, Caroline said, you've reviewed the proposed formula, your assessment? This was it, her first real contribution. Clara stood, keeping her voice level. The proposed formula uses a standardized calculation across all terrain types, which sounds equitable but actually penalizes operations in challenging geography. A company logging in steep mountain terrain will have higher costs, slower harvest cycles, and more environmental constraints than one working flat valleys. Applying the same yield limits to both creates an uneven playing field that favors large operations with access to easy terrain. That's the point of standardization, Crawford argued. Equal treatment. Equal treatment of unequal situations is just another form of bias, Clara replied. If we want truly sustainable practices, we need to account for variables like slope, soil composition, watershed proximity, and replanting viability. Otherwise, we're just rewarding companies that can strip flat land quickly while punishing those trying to work responsibly in difficult conditions. Another council member leaned forward. Do you have an alternative approach? Yes. Tier the calculations based on terrain classification. Establish different yield limits for mountain, foothill, and valley operations. Require environmental impact assessments for each tier. That way companies working harder terrain aren't punished for factors beyond their control. But they also can't use difficulty as an excuse for poor practices. The room went quiet. Caroline made notes, her expression thoughtful. That's actually sensible, one of the other members said, sounding surprised. Crawford looked like he'd bitten something sour. Implementing tiered systems would require extensive surveying and classification work. The cost of getting it wrong is worse, Clara interrupted. We either do this right, with real data and fair policies, or we create regulations that destroy small operators while big companies exploit loopholes. I've seen what happens when timber companies strip land without regard for consequences. The floods, the mudslides, the destroyed watersheds. If this council exists to prevent that, we need policies that actually work, not ones that look good on paper while accomplishing nothing. Caroline called for a vote on forming a subcommittee to develop tiered classification criteria. It passed 5-2, with Crawford and his railroad ally voting against. After the meeting, several people approached Clara, some to offer congratulations, others to probe her positions on other issues. She handled each conversation carefully, remembering Eleanor's lessons about saying enough to be credible without revealing everything. Victor Ashford was waiting in the corridor when she left. Mrs. Blackwood, impressive performance. Clara kept her expression neutral. Mr. Ashford, your tiered classification idea. Very clever. I'm curious whether you developed it yourself or had help. Does it matter? It matters if you're positioning yourself as an independent voice while actually serving your husband's business interests. His smile was cold. That would be deceptive. The council frowns on conflicts of interest. My husband's business follows sustainable practices regardless of what regulations pass. We benefit from good policy, not loopholes. Clara met his gaze directly. The same can't be said for Ashford Timber and Transport, which has been cited for overharvesting in 3 separate territories. Ancient history, all resolved. Resolved by paying fines instead of changing practices. That's not resolution. That's the cost of doing business. She moved past him. If you'll excuse me. This isn't over, Mrs. Blackwood. Clara stopped and looked back. No, it's not. But I'm not the scared girl you were hoping to intimidate. Whatever you're planning, whatever you and Crawford are working on together, I'll be watching, and I won't be quiet about it. She walked away, her heart pounding but her steps steady. Elias was waiting outside the building with their security. How'd it go? I made enemies and passed my first policy proposal. Seems about right. He laughed and pulled her into a quick embrace. That's my girl. The words hit Clara unexpectedly. My girl. Not my wife. Not Clara. Something more personal, more real. Elias, she started, I know. We need to talk, but not here. He guided her toward their carriage. Let's get back to the hotel first. That evening, in the privacy of Clara's hotel room, they finally had the conversation they'd been avoiding for months. This is working, Elias said, pacing near the window. Us. This arrangement. It's working better than I ever expected. But, Clara prompted, but it's still an arrangement. We're business partners who happen to be legally married. We have separate rooms, separate lives in a lot of ways. And I'm starting to wonder if that's what you actually want, or if you're just waiting for permission to want something different. Clara's chest tightened. What do you want? I want to know if this is ever going to be real. Not just a practical partnership, but actually real. He turned to face her. I care about you, Clara. Somewhere between the arguing and the council meetings and watching you take apart corrupt politicians, I started caring about you in ways that weren't part of the original contract. Elias? I'm not asking you to feel the same way. I'm just asking if you could, eventually, or if I should stop hoping for that and accept what we have. Clara stood, closing the distance between them. You want to know if I could love you. I want to know if you already do. Even a little. She thought about the past months, the late nights working on accounts together, the way he'd stood beside her at the reception, quiet support without trying to control her, the telescope and the stars, and his terrible attempts at reassurance that somehow always helped anyway. I don't know if what I feel is love, she said honestly. I don't have much experience with it, but I know I think about you constantly. I know I trust you more than I've trusted anyone since my parents died. I know the thought of you getting hurt makes me physically sick. She touched his face. Is that love? I don't know, but it's something, and it's growing. He pulled her closer, his hands gentle on her waist. That's enough. For now. That's more than enough. When he kissed her, it felt like coming home after a long journey. Clara kissed him back, pouring months of confusion and fear and unexpected affection into it. They didn't sleep together that night, both agreeing that was still too fast, too complicated. But they sat up talking until dawn, finally saying all the things they'd been holding back. Their fears, their hopes, what they actually wanted from this marriage beyond survival and business efficiency. By the time the sun rose over Denver, they'd made a decision. They'd stop treating their marriage like a contract and start treating it like what it had become. A partnership built on respect that was slowly, messily, imperfectly turning into something more. The next 6 months transformed Winter Hollow in ways Clara couldn't have imagined. With her council position came credibility. The territorial government started sending observers to see how Blackwood timber actually operated. What they found impressed them: sustainable practices, fair wages, community investment. Clara's tiered classification proposal became the model for new regulations across multiple territories. Other timber operations, seeing the writing on the wall, started implementing similar practices. Not out of goodness, but because the regulations were coming whether they liked it or not, and being ahead of the curve meant better terms. Victor Ashford fought every change, but he was losing ground. When evidence emerged that his company had been behind the false reports Crawford used, a formal investigation was launched. Crawford himself resigned from the board in disgrace, his political career effectively over. Eleanor's response to all this was characteristically blunt. "You've made powerful people look foolish. That's dangerous. But you've also made yourself indispensable. That's strategic." She'd smiled then, one of her rare, genuine smiles. "You've exceeded every expectation I had for you, Clara, including my own." At Winter Hollow itself, things changed more gradually, but just as profoundly. Clara stopped living in the West Wing and moved into Elias's rooms in the East. It wasn't a dramatic shift. They'd been spending most evenings together anyway. But it felt significant, a statement to the Valley and to themselves that this marriage was real. The workers' attitude shifted too. Clara wasn't just the boss's wife anymore. She was the woman who'd taken on territorial politicians and won, who'd stood up to Victor Ashford and made him back down, who remembered their names and their families and actually listened when they brought problems. She started a school for the workers' children, not because Eleanor suggested it or because it was politically smart, but because she'd seen too many kids growing up without education, without options. If Winter Hollow was going to be more than just a business, it needed to invest in futures beyond timber. Martha helped her organize it, finding a teacher from Denver who wanted mountain life, setting up a building near the workers' village. The first class had 11 students. By the end of the year, it had grown to 23. "You're building something," Martha told her one evening as they watched children playing outside the school. "Not just for now, for generations. I'm trying to make sure other girls don't have to choose between poverty and desperation," Clara said. "The boys don't end up in mines because there's no other option. That's all. That's everything, dear. That's changing the world one valley at a time." The confrontation Clara had been half expecting came in early autumn. Victor Ashford arrived at Winter Hollow unannounced, riding up to the main house with 2 of his own security men. Clara was in the office when Martha burst in. "Mr. Ashford's here. He's demanding to speak with you." "Where's Elias?" "North Timber Site. Won't be back for hours." Clara straightened her shoulders. "Then I'll handle it. Tell him I'll meet him in the front parlor in 5 minutes. And Martha, make sure someone's watching. I don't trust him not to try something stupid." Ashford was examining a painting when Clara entered, his back to her. He turned slowly, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Blackwood, thank you for seeing me. You didn't leave much choice. What do you want?" He pulled an envelope from his coat. "I'm here to make you an offer. $1 million for a controlling interest in Blackwood Timber. You and your husband can stay on as operational managers. You'd maintain your lifestyle, your home, everything. You'd just answer to a board of directors." Clara didn't take the envelope. "You're offering to buy us out. I'm offering you financial security and freedom from the constant battle of independent operation. With my resources and your husband's knowledge, we could dominate the entire territory." He set the envelope on a side table. "This is a generous offer, Clara. More than generous. It's a takeover dressed up as partnership. It's the future. Small operations like yours can't survive long term. Consolidation is inevitable. I'm giving you a chance to be part of it instead of being crushed by it." Clara looked at the envelope, at this man who'd spent months trying to undermine her, spread lies about her, threaten everything she and Elias had built. "No. Don't be foolish. I'm being practical. Your generous offer would give you control of our timber rights, our land, our workers. We'd be employees in our own valley, subject to your decisions about practices we've spent years perfecting." She moved to the door and opened it. "We're not interested. We'll never be interested. And if you try this kind of pressure tactic again, I'll make sure every newspaper in the territory knows that Victor Ashford has to resort to threats because he can't compete on merit. Ashford's expression hardened. You're making a mistake. No, I'm making a choice. There's a difference. Clara gestured to the open door. Leave, and don't come back. He left, but not before picking up his envelope and delivering one final warning. This valley can't stand alone forever. When you're ready to accept reality, the offer will be significantly lower. Then I guess we'll never accept it. After he'd gone, Clara sat down hard, her legs suddenly shaking. The enormity of what she'd just done hit her. She'd turned down $1 million, security for life. Everything she'd never dared dream about as a miner's daughter. But she'd also protected something more valuable than money, the autonomy to make their own decisions, to run the valley according to their own values, to build something that wasn't just profitable, but actually good. When Elias returned that evening and she told him what happened, he was quiet for a long time. $1 million, he finally said. I know. You turned it down without even discussing it with me. I did. Clara met his eyes. Are you angry? Angry? No. He pulled her into his arms. I'm trying to figure out how I got lucky enough to find someone who values what we've built here more than what we could sell it for. You didn't find me. You bought me, remember? Best investment I ever made. He kissed her forehead. Though for the record, I would have turned down that offer too. This valley isn't for sale. Not for $1 million. Not for $10 million. Good, because I already told him to go to hell. That winter was the hardest Clara had ever experienced. The snow came early and heavy, cutting off the valley for weeks at a time. Supplies ran low. 2 workers got sick with pneumonia. The mill wheel froze and took 3 days to get running again. But they survived it together. Clara spent those months working with Elias and the foreman to improve winter operations, setting up better supply caches, organizing crews to keep paths clear. She worked alongside Martha to ensure the workers' families had enough food and heat. She kept the school running even when it meant teaching classes herself because the regular teacher was snowed in. By the time spring arrived, the valley felt less like Elias's inherited property and more like their shared home, a place they'd defended together, built together, survived together. One evening in late March, as snow began melting and the first hints of green appeared on the aspens, Clara stood on the great porch overlooking the valley. Elias found her there, bringing 2 glasses of whiskey, another shared habit they'd developed. Penny for your thoughts, he said. Clara accepted the glass. I was thinking about how I got here. Everything that had to happen, Pa dying, the debts, you showing up with your ridiculous offer, any of it could have gone differently. Regret it? No. That's what's strange. I should regret it. Marrying a stranger, leaving everything familiar, getting thrown into territorial politics and business wars. It should have been a disaster. But it wasn't. It was. Repeatedly. But we survived the disasters, and somewhere in surviving them, I found something I didn't know I was looking for. She turned to face him. I found a partner. Someone who sees me as capable instead of fragile. Someone who fights beside me instead of for me. Someone who... She stopped, searching for words. Someone you love? Elias suggested gently. Clara considered it. Love had always seemed like something soft and safe in stories. What she felt for Elias was neither soft nor safe. It was fierce and complicated and built on respect as much as affection. It was wanting to murder him when he got stubborn about expanding the North operations, and also wanting to protect him from every threat the world could throw at them. It was trusting him with the parts of herself she'd never shown anyone else. Yeah, she said finally. Someone I love. Even though you're terrible at reassurance and you work too much, and you still occasionally make decisions without consulting me. And you're stubborn and reckless, and you scare the hell out of me every time you take on another powerful enemy. So we're a disaster. We're perfect disasters, together. He set down his glass and took both her hands. I love you, Clara. Not because you saved my business or made me look good at councils or any of that. I love you because you're brave enough to choose your own path even when it terrifies you, because you fight for what matters, because you turned a desperate arrangement into something real through sheer force of will. Clara felt tears threatening, happy ones, which still felt foreign after so many years of crying from grief or frustration. I love you too. even though you're a terrible romantic who proposed through a business contract. Want me to do it properly now? Absolutely not. We're already married. Let's not get carried away. He laughed and kissed her, and it felt like sealing a promise they'd been making to each other in pieces for months. The years that followed weren't easy. Building something real never is. Clara's work on the Territorial Council expanded. She helped draft forestry regulations that became models for other territories. She testified before boards and committees, always prepared, always armed with facts and data that her opponents couldn't refute. She made more enemies and more allies, learning to tell the difference between the two. Victor Ashford's company eventually collapsed under the weight of its own unsustainable practices and the investigations that Clara's testimony had helped trigger. She felt no satisfaction in it, just a grim acknowledgement that some people couldn't be convinced to change until reality forced them. James Crawford tried to rebuild his political career and failed, too many people remembering how he'd been caught using false data to push corrupt agendas. Eleanor eventually retired from active company management, declaring that Clara had things well in hand and she was too old for constant travel between Denver and the mountains. She stayed on as an advisor, still sharp and demanding, but she'd stopped trying to control every decision. The valley itself thrived. The school grew to accommodate 50 students. The workers' village expanded with better housing, a medical clinic, a community hall where people gathered for meetings and celebrations. Other timber operations started sending representatives to see how Winter Hollow managed sustainable practices and worker satisfaction simultaneously. It became a model, proof that profitability and responsibility didn't have to be mutually exclusive. Clara and Elias had their fights. Spectacular ones sometimes when their stubbornness collided over business decisions or expansion plans, or how to handle the next political crisis. But they also had their rhythms. Mornings working together on accounts, evenings walking through the valley, nights talking about dreams and fears and the future they were building. They didn't have children. Not for lack of trying, just one of those things biology doesn't cooperate with. Clara felt the ache of it sometimes, but she also knew she was building something that would outlast her regardless. The school, the valley, the policies that protected land and workers across the territory, those were her legacy. 5 years after that first desperate contract was signed, Clara stood in the same spot on the porch where she and Elias had admitted they loved each other. She was 31 now, older and hopefully wiser. The valley spread before her, green and gold in the summer light, smoke rising from 40 chimneys instead of 30. Elias joined her, moving with the comfortable familiarity of someone who'd found his person and stopped looking. "Martha says dinner's ready," he said. "In a minute, I'm thinking." "About what?" Clara looked at the valley, at everything they'd built, everything they'd fought for, everything they'd become in the process of choosing each other again and again through circumstances that could have torn them apart. "I was remembering that first night you showed up at my cabin, how terrified I was, how desperate, how certain I was making a mistake that would destroy whatever was left of my life." "Were you wrong?" "Completely. It did destroy my old life, just not in the way I expected." She leaned into him. "You destroyed the girl who thought survival meant accepting scraps and being grateful for them. You helped build someone who expects more from the world, who demands more, who fights for it." "I didn't build that." "You did." "We did. Together." Clara turned to face him fully. "That's what I've learned, I think, that the best things aren't given or taken. They're built, piece by piece, choice by choice, fight by fight. Nothing smooth, nothing easy, nothing perfect, just real." Elias pulled her close, his chin resting on her head. "Think we'll ever stop fighting?" "Not a chance." "Good. I'd be bored otherwise." They went inside to dinner, to Martha's cooking and Eleanor's correspondence that needed reviewing and the 100 small tasks that made up their life. Later, they'd tackle the new water rights dispute that was developing. They'd plan the fall term for the school. They'd argue about whether to expand operations or consolidate existing ones. But for now, for this moment, Clara allowed herself to simply be, to exist in the life she'd chosen, with the partner she'd found in the most unexpected way possible. She'd started her journey as a desperate woman with $14 and no options, willing to marry a stranger to survive. She'd ended it as someone who'd changed territorial policy, built a thriving community, and discovered that strength wasn't about never being afraid or desperate or lost. It was about making choices anyway. about building something from nothing, about turning a calculated arrangement into genuine love through the simple act of showing up again and again when it would have been easier to quit. The mountains had tested her. Politics had tried to break her. Society had judged her unworthy. She'd survived it all by refusing to accept other people's definitions of what she could be or accomplish. And in the end, standing on a porch overlooking a valley she'd helped transform, beside a man she'd married for survival and stayed with for love, Clara understood something she'd been too busy fighting to realize before. She wasn't the mountain man's bought bride anymore. She wasn't the desperate miner's daughter, or the unqualified council member, or any of the other labels people had tried to attach to her. She was simply Clara, imperfect, stubborn, scarred by loss and strengthened by choices, building a legacy that mattered not because it was smooth or pretty or what anyone expected, but because it was real and it was hers. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.